Chapter 1062. In the long map, Hades, who was deep in thought, suddenly raised his hand. The feeling of nothingness spread in the air and landed on the depth map. The invisible fingers touched the ups and downs and positions on the map, tracing the route and traces left behind by the prey. Just now, the water mirror of the fallen country had captured the fluctuations of the source substance of a large secret instrument. It was in the scar area. The minister's mind raced as he began to think again. They wanted to rely on the environment of the scar area to shake off their pursuers, to stall for more time, or did they want to launch another counterattack? Was this overestimation of their abilities or confidence? But he kept feeling that something was wrong. Seeing that the enemy had entered a dead end and did not turn back, he did not dare to relax or mock them in the slightest. Instead, he became more vigilant and uneasy. What did they want to do at the critical juncture of the War of the Worlds? What did Huaishur want to do? The scar area? Celestial genealogy? Those remnants of the utopia? Suddenly, a strange feeling rose from Hades's heart. Faint ripples spread in his thoughts, bringing about an indescribable understanding. In the pair of pitch-black eye sockets, a dark flame faintly appeared. So that's how it is. There must be something there. Something that made the celestial genealogy not hesitate to go deep into hell at this juncture. No matter how many opponents they provoked, no matter how many enemies were chasing behind them, they would not hesitate to go deep into the land of death to find something. A relic of authority, a miracle engraving, or was it the treasure of the utopia? It did not matter. The moment this realization surfaced in his mind, the last trace of gloominess silently dissipated, replaced by an unwavering determination. In the dark, Hades grinned, a silent, sinister smile. Go and tell Golden Dawn. He ordered his subordinates, have them send the route of the stairway to heaven over. I want the highest specification, one that can resist the interference of the scar area and go deep into it. He wanted Golden Dawn to build a door for himself that could cross several depths and directly reach the deepest part of the scar area. But we don't have that many resources. The subordinate was stunned. As the builders of the stairs to hell, those lunatics were not the most benevolent of people. At this critical moment, any urgent route had to be charged dozens of times more than usual. Even if it didn't lead to the present realm, it was still the same. Don't worry, I won't pay. Hades turned around and said coldly to the air, you want it for free, and you also want to provide me with at least 4 additional legions. Otherwise, from now on, we will stop all actions and watch as your eternal enemy rises once again. Just as you wish. Before the subordinate could reply, a figure that shouldn't exist appeared in the darkness. The sound of the cane hitting the ground was crisp and clear. Mathers smiled and adjusted his hat. Although I don't have an army, I'm sure my creation will satisfy your appetite. Behind him, the silhouette of a giant beast slowly rose from the boiling shadows. Its huge wings instantly tore the sky apart, and dozens of legions were shrouded in that strange shadow. The monster that was bred from the blood of the abyss had appeared. Then, in the depths of the dark abyss, the land of dreams that floated between the abyss glowed, and a stairway to heaven descended from the distant hell. In an instant, the fog was torn apart. The dazzling light paved the way like polar neon, leading Huaishur and the others to death. How far are we? On the sun ship, Huaishur suddenly raised his head. Now, the sun ship that was operating at full power was galloping above hell. The waves of the Styx River spread out like a phantom, sweeping across the barren world. Only afterimages were left behind. Odom closed his eyes and sensed for a moment before replying, with the current speed, it will take about 4 hours. There's no time. Huaishur shook his head and felt the rapidly rising intuition of death. He decisively connected to the bridge. Inform everyone to prepare for battle. Our enemy is about to arrive. Not only Raymond on the bridge, but also Gregory, Forster, and even Anton raised their heads in their cabins. Soon, the low sound of steel rubbing against each other spread from every corner of the sun's ship. In the darkness, pairs of bloodthirsty eyes slowly lit up. Wait, there's nothing ahead. Odom was stunned. Through the perception of countless rust snails, he could sense the shadows and terror left in this empty fog, guiding them to avoid the trap. At the same time, he also monitored the tracks of the pursuers. Among them, even the closest was still a long distance away, but then the eyes at all depths caught a glimpse of the rainbow light that was flying towards them. Stairway to Heaven? He was silent for a moment, and his tone became complicated. They really put in a lot of effort. At this moment, the depth of the disturbance in the scar area no longer changed rapidly. Under the shroud of the rainbow light, the originally ambiguous and blurry chaotic zones quickly fell into calmness. The secret instrument of the same origin as the Rainbow Bridge operated in the abyss, stirring up a massive amount of disasters, tearing apart the eternally dim sky above their heads, and colorful auroras spread out. Immediately after, countless figures descended from the sky. It was like a rainstorm. Under the guidance of the Stairway to Heaven, the legions and enemies wandering in the fog were constantly projected in front of them. They were even enveloped in it, tearing apart the waves of the Nether River and entangling the sunship, causing their progress to gradually become sluggish. Speed up. On the bridge, Huai sure saw the dark shadows on the screen, but he couldn't see any high-threat targets at all. They were all cannon fodder. All departments, get ready, but don't rush to make a move, Huaisher said. They want to consume our time and energy. It was like a hunter chasing his prey, continuously releasing hounds, forcing the enemy to flee in a panic, while he crawled into a blind spot. Then he would slowly raise his gun barrel, kill all the opponents, and capture Huaisher alive. On the ground, among the countless enemies, a group of mouse men excitedly raised the bone weapons in their hands while drooling. Their eyes were already bloodshot under the effect of stimulants. But before they could excitedly rush to their opponents, they saw a towering silhouette tearing apart the thin fog. The huge armored warship pushed forward with a loud bang. The terrifying mass ravaged and destroyed everything in front of it. The blood-stained gully quickly spread forward. The excited shouts were instantly replaced by shouts of horror. Under the cover of the dark shadow, there was no way to escape. The sun ship sped through it as if it was entering an uninhabited land. But at this moment, everyone's heart gradually sank. The darkness formed by countless enemies seemed to have no end at all. It was like a real ocean. No matter how the sun ship kept flashing and advancing, it still couldn't escape its range. Is there a way to dive deep? Huaisher asked. Yes, but I'm afraid the other side can't wait for us to do so. Raymond gritted his teeth, and the expression of the giant knight gradually turned ferocious. Faint electric sparks burst out from the gaps of his teeth along with the friction of his teeth. What the sticks needed to unfold was a relatively stable depth condition. Once it was slightly disturbed by the heaven ladder during this process, the entire sun ship would be torn apart by the huge change in depth. Self-disintegration. Even if it was a large support vehicle, it still had its limits. Its body was too large, and it couldn't produce a strong depth field like Anubis of the same level, allowing it to warp freely within 6 depths at any time. Hell finally revealed its most ferocious side to them. Endless cheap monsters were rapidly catalyzed and bred by the disaster. Under the control of the heaven ladder, they were thrown to the battlefield. Gradually, the smooth road turned into a quagmire, and the cold, murderous intent was hidden among the endless opponents. The radar suddenly set off an ear-piercing sound. High-energy reaction. The red dragon roared. In the distance, among the countless rat men, mutants that were dozens of meters tall and covered in sutures suddenly appeared. They were also from the large group of rat men from hell, but at this moment, they had an aura that was completely different from their compatriots. Not only were their huge bodies swollen to the point of being stupefied, but also the thick water that constantly seeped out of their limbs and the mutated organs that were completely unrelated to rat men. That was the Black Death Army, a freak bred from hundreds of millions of rat men, a huge monster created after countless surgeries and sutures. At this moment, under the pull of the sutured giant rats, countless ropes snapped straight, and roars rose and fell one after another. The other end of the rope sank into the ground, as if it was tied to something huge, causing the soil on the ground to rapidly churn. In the end, a giant white bone cannon that was several meters tall was pulled out of the mud out of thin air. A huge amount of blood rolled over from the surroundings and poured into the cannon, turning into a huge rotten crystal that flew out of the giant white bone cannon. Accompanied by a loud rumble, the origin substance displacement shield around Sun ship faintly appeared. A dazzling firework exploded in the void. However, the high temperature did not spread. Instead, it was replaced by a severe cold. The terrifying cold instantly froze a large number of cannon fodder into stone-like ice sculptures. It's useful. It's useful. At the back, the ecstatic plague warlord spat out pitch-black saliva and screamed, "Go, all of you go! Kill all of these reality realm people for me. When we capture Huaishur alive, everyone will be given 10 stinky women." He excitedly emphasized, "As stinky as you want, as stinky as you want." Immediately, an ear-piercing horn sounded to convey the warlord's order. A large amount of rotten tail grass was poured into the cannon fodder's mouth, and even more inferior weapons were stuffed into their hands, pushing them in front of Sun ship. Then even more sutured giant rats screamed and excitedly pulled the ropes in their hands. The blessing from the ruler, the Rat King, had descended. All treasures are buried in the ground. Gold was like this, silver was like this, bones were like this, death was like this. Under the nourishment of the rat men's blood, all the spoils on the battlefield were offerings to the Rat King. At this moment, there was already a tunnel leading to the rat man demon realm in the depths of the earth. Not only were there giant bone cannons and crudely made swords, but when countless ropes were pulled, a large amount of soil was quickly stirred up, and huge towers were pulled out of thin air. The huge siege towers that were pieced together from rotten wood and rusted steel burned with raging flames. Their huge bodies that were dozens of meters tall were not inferior to Sun ship's height. Even if they were constantly peeling off parts under the blood-colored water, even more siege towers were pulled out from the ground like crops. Dozens, hundreds, thousands, like submerged reefs that gradually rose from the deep sea, they began to surround Sun ship. At that moment, on the bridge, Huaishur expressionlessly raised his finger and knocked on the armrest. Suddenly, the illusion of a huge door slowly rose from the void. The door to the end opened here. Chapter 1063. The moment the shadow spread out, the countless siege towers that had risen from the ground suddenly stopped. With the infusion of the origin substance, the miracle that belonged to great Si Ming unfolded. In an instant, it covered the entire area within a few kilometers of Sun ship. That thin domain did not cause any damage, but it was enough to affect the Rat King's gift. Indeed, there were countless treasures buried in the ground that could create all kinds of tools. But what if the treasures could not be buried in the ground? Most of the blood and death that had been sacrificed to the ruler had been diverted, continuously entering the ultimate and condensing into steel. In the empty warehouse, flames appeared out of nowhere, and crystal iron rapidly grew and multiplied, continuously being sent into the processing chamber through the assembly line. Even if it was a piece of iron made from inferior blood, it could still be put to good use. At this moment, outside, more siege towers that had yet to take shape began to tremble violently. Unable to get enough blood, they died in the womb, or their weak foundation that had barely grown could not support the huge weight. They collapsed with a loud bang. But there were still more siege towers being pulled by countless sutured giant rats on the battlefield. Like a city wall, they piled up and combined with each other in an attempt to stop Sunship's advance. Then they were crushed like dry weeds, turning into wreckage on the ground. But after witnessing all this, the plague warlord did not fly into a rage or become discouraged. Instead, he became more and more overjoyed. Very good, very good. He swung his tongue and shouted, becoming more and more excited. You guys did well. You guys did well. Go, go. Hey, what are you guys doing? Behind him, the expressions of the solidified in the shadows became gloomier. This group of former children of Doomsday, the remnants of the celestial genealogy that had once chased all over hell, could no longer tolerate the insolence of Huaishur and the others. We did not hire you to go through the motions and send you to your deaths. That's right, that's right. The plague warlord was overjoyed. The faster the better, the more the better. Of course, the more the better. In all fairness, were things like the rat men really valuable? Other than being able to give birth, they had no other use. But as long as it could exist in hell and not become food on the table, it must have its own unique use. Even if the quantity reached a certain limit, it would be enough to cause a qualitative change. The living cannot change qualitatively. Even if they're dead, that's fine. At this moment, large amounts of death, destruction, corpses, and blood were rapidly falling onto the dry and barren land. It was completely swallowed by the pitch-black soil. However, when the fragile towers were crushed, new towers rose from the ground. They grew larger, more ferocious, and more berserk. After countless rat-men died, sutured greater rats would crawl out of the mud one after another. A war of attrition. This was a war of attrition that could only be supported by the Rat King's Black Death Corps. As long as there was this land that was constantly filled with blood and death, more and more treasures would grow out of the graves. At this moment, after being destroyed several times, the reborn tower chariot was covered in something that looked like flesh and blood. Its outer layer was covered in a carapace that looked like bones. The degree of difficulty had also changed from the original thin paper to a piece of iron. In fact, it was still increasing with the destruction and rebirth. Don't worry. Since I've taken your money, I'll definitely do a good job for you. The plague warlord said to the employers with a beaming expression, "What is the most important thing in this year? It's credibility. It's service. It's loyalty. Even if you change your requirements 100,000 times, as long as you give enough money, the Black Death Corps will be your best choice. Hey, what are you guys still standing there for? Can't you see that my tea is cold? Pour the tea. Pour the tea." He did not have the slightest arrogance or dignity of a crown wearer. He rubbed his hands and directly snatched the kettle. He poured tea and water for the employers in front of him. Then he began to skillfully massage their shoulders and legs. At the outermost periphery of the battlefield, the rat men had already built a high platform and occupied the best observation position. They provided the guests with the best viewing experience and the highest standard of service. Even though this service wasn't that good, but the most important thing was the spirit. They were not afraid of hardship, fatigue, or even death. As long as there was enough rotten tail grass for the rats below to chew, they would even dare to stab the ruler twice. Of course, whether they could stab or not, and whether the people above had the courage to do, so were two different things. But didn't the Black Death Corps rely on their fearless tyranny and their inexhaustible numbers to move unhindered in hell? At this moment, no matter how picky the boss was when he saw the scene of countless rat men risking their lives to fight, he could not help but praise and give a thumbs up the originally gloomy expressions of the solidifiers of the children of Doomsday eased a little, and they could not help but nod slightly. Continue, as long as you can capture, why sure, I will give you twice the money. The leader of the solidifiers threw a money bag over. Whether you can earn it or not depends on your ability. The plague warlord fell to the ground and caught the money bag. When he saw the colorful disaster crystals inside, he became more and more excited. He turned back and shouted, "What are you waiting for? You bunch of trash, fire your cannons. Open fire. Let the uncles hear it." The sound of the bugle horn rose and fell one after another. More and more white bone cannons poked their heads out of the soil and spewed fire at the sun ship. Huge bone bullets mixed with flesh and blood soared in the sky, and some even grew bare wings to spy on the left and right. They did not even need to aim. A large number of bone bullets continuously hit the origin shield. Even if they were repelled, they would spread their wings and return. Just like a DDoS attack, a large amount of garbage data was constantly used to increase the pressure on the shield, causing the load on the defense system to rapidly increase. From the surrounding soil, countless huge iron balls were squeezed out of the blood water. Those huge iron balls, which were as tall as 2 people, quickly rolled on the ground. Huge sutured rats flicked their tongues after taking medicine. Their eyes turned white as they frantically ran inside, pushing the iron balls to spin and roll. They closely chased around the sun ship like marbles, constantly scratching and colliding with the armor of the ship. Sparks flew. Even more ropes were thrown out from the iron balls, wanting to hang on the side of the ship and rush onto the deck. But under the swing of the giant mechanical arm, they were thrown out one after another. F***CK, F***CK, F***CK. I just repainted it. Raymond roared furiously. Why are these things so annoying? There were a few times when he could not help but fire, but until now, the other side still had not caused any effective damage to them. They were just like a group of flies flying around, unable to be killed, unable to be eliminated, but also extremely annoying. "Don't be anxious." Huaisher leaned back in his chair and said calmly, "Wait a little longer. Wait until the other side could not hold on any longer. Those guys wanted to fight a war of attrition, but there was a sun ship equipped with a rock iron heart and a max-level great seaming here, so their endurance was basically maxed out. Would attrition be of any use? More importantly, there were those guys hiding in the dark who had not made a move yet. Just relying on numbers, I'm afraid it will be difficult to crush that kind of opponent, right?" Mathers asked, "Do you need my help?" "Anytime. No hurry." In the darkness, pitch-black tears flowed from the corner of Joker's eyes, but the smile at the corner of his mouth became crazier. Wait a little longer. It's like they are waiting for us." Even if the enemy was right in front of him, Hades still maintained his self-control, suppressing his killing intent, waiting for an opening to appear. But there was someone who could not wait any longer. At this moment, above the sky of the battlefield, a crack finally appeared. Holy light shone from it, as if the path to the kingdom of God had opened. Countless black shadows flew out from it. The hunting angels with wings on their backs sang praises, gathering into a huge ring and spreading out from it. Countless blurry concentric circles vaguely covered the entire battlefield. They turned everything into a sacrifice for the great ruler and God. The solemn sacrifice was about to begin. A towering figure slowly descended from the crack behind the sky. The 16 wings of light on his back flapped, and the glorious crown on his head burst out with light. His 4 arms held a spear, a one-handed sword, and a large shield, respectively. His entire body was covered in heavy and solemn armor. On the golden helmet was a face of mercy, weeping blood. Mercy for the people of the world, endless suffering. Under the command of the ruler of paradise, the archangel of mercy, a great existence called the ruler had descended, overlooking everything in the mortal world. Soon, the spear was raised. It pointed to where the enemy was. Suddenly, the hunting angels in the sky sang praises loudly. Countless winged angels raised their hands, clenched the illusory holy light, and threw it down. In an instant, a storm of light spears covered the battlefield. Countless sharp blades stabbed into the shield, causing countless cracks to appear. An ear-piercing alarm sounded. Then, in the detection of the radar, dozens, hundreds, and thousands of high-threat targets appeared at the end of the horizon. Wisps of strange, gray fog appeared from nothingness. Skinny armored knights that were 2 to 3 meters tall walked toward the battlefield. Wisps of gray fog coiled around their bodies, as if they were solid. The fog constantly changed, as if it was alive. Sometimes it was like a vicious giant snake, and sometimes it turned into the vague outline of a war horse. It was the crystallization of endless pain, despair, and excitement. It was an origin-form beast raised by the cult of corruption, a fog that absorbed souls and ate origin form. The interior of the heavy armor was completely empty. Only countless chaotic and painful origin substances surged about, forming a frenzied soul that was eternally tormented and berserk. At this moment, the torment knights from the cult of corruption rode on the fog and stepped onto the battlefield. It was as if they couldn't see the Ratmen army in front of them and didn't care about the attacks of the hunting angels above them. The torment knights advanced step by step, moving very quickly. The fog was like wings, allowing them to fly across the battlefield. The Black Death army in front of them was torn apart in an instant. Countless origin form was quickly sucked away and turned into a part of the crazy souls. The holy light spears that fell from the sky couldn't kill them. Instead, as the armor shattered, the tortured souls went crazy again. Scarlet tentacles extended from the cracks in the armor and constantly gnawed on the souls around them to make up for their own integrity. Unlike the group of cheap cannon fodder that couldn't be killed, this was the real army of hell. Okay. At that moment, Huaishur turned around and said to Anton, "Now, we can send out our gift." In the thick protective suit, the old professor revealed the unique, expectant smile of the people of the Russian Federation. He raised his hand and smashed the big red button in front of him. There was a crisp sound, followed by the high-pitched sound of steel rubbing against each other. The deck of the sun ship quickly flipped over and shrunk, revealing the launch track that led directly to the warehouse below, as well as countless budding flowers on the track. There was no need for GPS navigation, nor was there a need for radar locking. Relying on the most traditional mechanics and aerodynamics, this crystallization of war from the present world was once again created. The next moment, the thing that was once called the V-1 missile dragged a long-tail flame and ejected from the track. It spread out its folded wings and flew into the cloudy sky. Then it swooped down. It was difficult to estimate the number at that moment. Was it hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands? Even Anton himself didn't know how many leftover materials that Huaishur used up were sent to the assembly line and finally processed into one-off products after he set the law of automatic production. The only thing he knew was the report from the androids. A lot, so much that after filling up 2 warehouses, it filled at least the corridor and all the kobold rooms. Now, in the warehouse, countless kobolds were so moved that they were about to cry. They ran around to tell each other that they finally didn't have to sleep on bombs anymore. Their work efficiency was more than 10 times higher, and these deadly weapons were pushed onto the launch track at a speed that they had never experienced before in their lives. Launch, 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 and launch again. It wasn't until the sky was covered with dense black dots that 1/3 of the warehouse was finally cleared. Now, destruction was falling from the sky. Woola! Behind the mask, Anton whispered softly. Along with his words, countless terrifying blazing lights rose from the ground. It was as if they were in a dark and dense forest for an instant. It made them involuntarily feel the vastness of the world and their own insignificance. However, the forest here was not dark. Instead, it was bright. Above the countless giant trees that soared into the sky, flowers of flames bloomed. Tranquility no longer existed. Only a sweeping wave of burning wind covered everything in an instant. In the blink of an eye, the whole world seemed to be illuminated by flames. Countless metal explosives raged in this barren world, spread, and engulfed all the dust that dared to intrude into their domain, spreading heat and death. Leaving behind rising and spreading dust, blazing burning wind, countless metal vapors shining like spots of light, and even endless dark scorched earth. There was a moment of dead silence. Outside the range of the explosion, even the Black Death Legion's reserve troops who did not know what was good for them were stunned on the spot. Under the collapsed high platform, the ground suddenly bulged. The Plague Warlord, whose face was covered in dust, raised his head and saw the scene in front of him. He was not angry, but happy. He was anxious. He was anxious. He was anxious. They had only sent out less than 1/3 of their forces. Moreover, he could feel that the huge object born from the corpses of countless ratmen under the ground was slowly taking shape. Ha ha ha. Everyone, please take a look. This is their way of death. Even at this time, the Plague Warlord still did not forget to serve. He happily introduced to the people behind him. Squandering their strength like this may seem glorious, but in fact, they are just digging their own graves. It won't be long before we can. The more he spoke, the more he felt that something was wrong, because there was no response behind him. When he turned around in a daze, he saw the wreckage of countless missiles and the seats that had long been burned to ashes in the high temperature and completely evaporated. Wait, he rubbed his eyes and was stunned. Where were the VIP seats that were sitting here just now? F***CK. Where did the VIP seats go? The answer was that the VIP seats were gone. Because the main cannon fire from the sun ship, it could be said to be exquisite. Let's do it again. On the bridge, Weisher pointed at the Plague Warlord's face that was rapidly zooming in on the screen. This is too ugly. Hurry up and take it away. It hurts my eyes. No problem. Raymond grinned sinisterly and pulled the trigger. A blazing light flashed and disappeared. After a long time, the plasma that fell from the sky illuminated the dull face. Then, amidst a tragic scream, the person wearing the crown melted into ashes. This is too much. Under the charred ground, the soil soaked in blood quickly churned. A face covered in sutures crawled out and screamed as if he had lost his parents. VIP, my VIP. The Plague Warlord, who had been reborn from the corpse, was so distressed that he almost shed tears of blood. It was unknown whether he felt sorry for the boss or the rest of the money. Get him for me. The warlord raised his head and roared angrily at the sutured giant rats that crawled out of the soil behind him. Take revenge for the boss. The ground churned, and more rat men crawled out of the graves. Then, behind them were giant bone cannons and almost completely animated siege towers. Under the Plague Warlord's crotch, the siege tower was made of pale skeletons with flesh and blood attached to it. Countless damaged, rat-men, were glued to it like leftovers, forming a genuine monster. "Oh, it seems to be uglier." Raymond clicked his tongue and sighed as he spread out his arms. In front of him, countless hovering windows appeared to be aiming at the most dangerous targets. The bombardment from the sun ship's main cannon had begun. It was aimed at all enemies indiscriminately, and in the blanket attack of the metal bombs, just now, many suffering knights and hunting angels that had been involved in the bombardment climbed up from the dust again. Except for a few unlucky ones that had been hit head-on, the others only had 2 more cracks on their bodies. It was not a big deal, and in the middle of the sky, the Archangel Ruler, who was hanging high, raised the spear in his hand again. Thus, endless holy light spears descended like a storm, tearing apart the missiles in midair. There were even furious hunting angels that had already pounced down, tearing apart the missiles that were about to explode, and swallowing the hot metal bombs into their stomachs. This time, the ruler finally took action. In his hand, the spear endlessly extracted the light from paradise. Layers of hymns wrapped around it, and the glorious and greedy light of hell converged into a faint, huge blade. It was aimed at the sun ship. The next moment, a ray of light flashed across the sky. A rumbling sound spread. The sun ship suddenly shook, and the origin shield wailed. Even though it was far away, it was already unable to bear the burden. Then, before it collapsed, it began to rapidly disappear. On the deck, Forster raised his shotgun expressionlessly, looked up at the glorious spear in the sky, and pulled the trigger. Chapter 1064. 2 seconds ago, after the emergency deactivation of the origin shield, the chief engineer knelt down on one knee on the deck. With the muzzle raised, the blessing of the 12 Titans descended. The ancestor of mankind, Iapetos, gave him the eyes to stare into the abyss. In an instant, he locked onto the enemy's location and saw the essence of the abyss. Then, the goddess of memory and the past, Monomosu, revealed the past to him, causing the world in front of him to fall apart into countless fragments of time. In the observation of that pair of eyes, countless extended lenses unfolded, and the amount of information that was enough to completely burn the brain exploded every moment. Finally, the goddess of radiant light, Fubai, gave a precious revelation. It was the eternal truth of the world. No matter what happened, no matter who, no matter where, all things would eventually return to death. Thus, all history and the past disappeared, and all that was left was a certain future. In the darkness, Forster had gradually glimpsed the end of time from the future, the death of the ruler. But before that, an endless, terrifying shadow appeared behind the ruler, sprinkling a frenzied radiance. Rancher, that overly large silhouette, had long covered the ruler's existence. Long ago, it had merged with the rancher's food chain and was inseparable. It was the hunting angel, the rancher's favorite fork, its fine and white teeth, its soft tongue, and at the same time, its stinky gastric juices, and bile, Before the revelation was revealed, it had already disappeared in the chaos. As the illusory light dissipated, a fine cracking sound came from Forster's right eye. It was dark. Sticky blood streaks slid down from the corner of his eye like tears. It's good to have a backer. Forster clicked his tongue expressionlessly. Although he had expected it, he couldn't help but feel lucky. Now that he had suffered a loss, there was nothing to say. He didn't rashly carve the other party's name. He directly pulled the trigger at the ruler in the sky. In the blink of an eye, a streak of metallic light flew out from the muzzle of the spear. It rose straight into the sky and collided with the spear of holy light descending from the sky. A high-pitched and sharp sound of friction burst forth and spread, almost enveloping the entire area, trampling on every innocent eardrum. After that, Everyone saw that the huge spear that was falling from the sky was actually pierced through by a thin line of bullet marks. Countless fragments rapidly fell from above. The spear tip collapsed, turning into a rain of light that sprinkled down towards the ground. Everywhere it passed, everything was devoured by the eternal thirst contained within it, and it left behind numerous pitch-black marks. However, the bullet was still rising upward. He looked at the face of the ruler. Ridiculous. The archangel didn't even look down. She just casually slashed down with the sword in her hand, cutting the bullet forged by the great grandmaster in half. The remains of the shrapnel flew out from both sides, but they did not disappear. Instead, they seemed to have come alive and began to gallop and shuttle back and forth again. In the blink of an eye, the entire sky was covered by the flying streams of light. One was horizontal, the other was vertical. Those fine grids were like woven cloth, enveloping the entire sky and covering the sky of hell with a fog-like garment. After an instant, everything disappeared without a trace. Only a clean and neat fracture could be vaguely seen. Wherever that layer of fleeting grid passed, everything would silently fall apart. The spears of light thrown by the hunting angels were completely intercepted by this layer of fleeting grids. Not only that, but the angels at the very front were also quickly disintegrated. Solemn armor, sharp weapons, radiant wings, and even the remnants of the body made of pus and rotten flesh. Pitch-black blood sprinkled down like a torrential rain. A crisp sound finally burst forth from the ruler's helmet. On that merciful and bloodthirsty mask, 2 intersecting scratches slowly appeared. The ruler was slightly startled. Her scarlet eyes looked down once more. But after quickly closing the origin shield, Forster had already disappeared without a trace, hiding in the darkness once more. Only the scorching hot bullet shell continued to roll and bounce, gradually losing its temperature. "Run!" Forster shouted through the communication device. In the brief silence, the ruler's bloodthirsty face didn't change at all. Only the scarlet eyes behind the helmet gradually revealed fury. In her hand, the giant shield depicting the 46th floor of paradise was slowly raised. The holy light that filled the sky suddenly shrank, condensing into substance, revealing the outline of God's kingdom. Inside, the moment the gate of heaven opened, tens of thousands of rays of light burst out from within. An ear-piercing alarm exploded from the sun ship. Raymond only felt a burst of horror burst out from his scalp. Long before that, he had pulled down the joystick of Flash Shuttle. But soon after, a mighty stream of light slashed down from the sky and swept across the ground, leaving behind a deep ravine. Hot pursuit. When the outline of God's kingdom dissipated with the exhaustion of the light, the reflection of paradise on the shield also dimmed and blurred. And on the ground, dozens of deep cracks were spread out. Everywhere the light passed, everything was devoured by the greedy mouth of paradise. The hasty Flash Shuttle caused the sunship to slide on the ground in a sorry state, the stern of the ship drawing a ravine in the endless sea of monsters. In a short instant, Sunship had already shuttled back and forth 16 times before narrowly dodging this wave of attacks that covered the entire area. The price was that the core engine was overloaded, the high temperature that was enough to burn people's skin spread out in the bottom compartment, and pillars of air spurted out from the pressure relief valve on the deck. It looked like a whale stranded on a barren beach. As early as the engine warmed up during the first jump, the origin shield had already shattered in an instant. Waves of green smoke rose from the stern of the ship, and the armor that covered it had already disappeared without a trace. Raymond's expression twitched. In the 16 jumps just now, if he had been just a little bit late, the entire ship might have been cut in half by that terrifying light. But without waiting for him to catch his breath, the Red Dragon let out an ear-piercing voice. Impact warning. The sun ship suddenly shook, and a huge animated siege tower crawled out from the churning soil. The ugly face of the plague warlord appeared at the top of the siege tower, grinning sinisterly. Aha, over here. The siege tower that had been animated into a giant monster still had flames and charcoal from the metal fuel that was constantly peeling off. But at this moment, when it opened its arms, it clung tightly to the bow of the sun ship, just like a ticket evader clinging to the front of a train. Through the window, it revealed a complacent and excited expression to the pilot. "Caught you guys." The reply was the main cannon of the sun ship. It instantly rotated 180 degrees, and like a heavy iron rod, it smashed into its face. "Let go of this, Grandpa," Raymond roared, and a huge mechanical arm stretched out from the cabin cover at the front of the ship, smashing into the belly of the animated siege tower like a fist. It tore open its carapace and pulled out the flesh and blood transmission structure inside. Rotten organs and blood flowed everywhere. And at the stern of the sun ship, 16 nozzles instantly lit up. Engine number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 5 operated at full power, and the injection began. Amidst a loud boom, the sun ship forcefully pushed forward against the siege tower that the warlord had fused with, brazenly breaking through the encirclement of the other 2 siege towers. Then, the cannon barrel aimed at the warlord's face lit up with lightning. Fire! It was as easy as smashing a broken watermelon, but immediately after, there was an earth-shattering collision sound. Everyone's vision turned black, and the brazenly speeding sun ship seemed to have collided with a heavy mountain. It came to an abrupt stop, and terrifying tremors spread throughout the ship. Everyone involuntarily soared into the sky. In the hold, countless kobolds screamed in horror as they pounced at the missiles that had left their fixed frames, hugging them tightly, not daring to let go. At the bow of the ship, the animated siege tower that had been pushed forward had instantly been smashed into a pile of mud. But there was clearly nothing in front of them. There was only empty air. Even the radar didn't detect any traces of anything. It was as if the air had suddenly turned into heavy steel, blocking their path. Immediately after, the enemy hidden in the void seemed to be grinning sinisterly as it stretched out its huge arm and smashed down. The sun ship that landed on the ground let out a wail. A turret on the deck was instantly smashed to pieces. Immediately after, with a huge sweep, the remaining machine guns and even the external radar were wiped out. An invisible force entangled the sun ship, forcefully pulling it up from the ground and suspending it in the air. The red dragon hissed and struggled. Its mechanical arm swept across, and sparks burst out in the air as if it had hit an enemy. Only now, when both sides were close, did a terrifying signal reaction appear from the radar's detection. The moment it appeared, it soared endlessly. It was almost at the level of a ruler. "What the hell is that?" Raymond widened his eyes. Only then did they see a silhouette slowly appear in the air in front of them. It was a fortress made of steel. Countless chimneys pointed to the sky and shot out pitch-black smoke. Dozens of huge metal legs and limbs supported this inconceivably exaggerated fortress. It stood on the ground. Deformed steel hands stretched out from the huge gate of the castle and hugged sun ship in their arms. On the walls of the fortress that were covered in rust, a blurry and abstract face slowly protruded, and the symbol of the newcomer appeared on its forehead. Above the totem logo of the Hell Workshop Master, there was a huge sequence of numbers. Number 77, the 77th Workshop Master, had descended into this hell. No, even before the war began, it had been lurking in this eternal fog, waiting for the right moment. It was waiting for its prey to come to its door. It's time to pay back the interest, pretty boy of celestial genealogy. At the core of the machinery factory, surrounded by countless levers and buttons, The bloated workshop master, who was sitting upright on the operator's seat, gritted his teeth. His 3 eyes were filled with viciousness and anger. I swear, one day, that bitch Sunmaker will meet the same end as you. At the front of the fortress, the face opened its mouth, and the structure of the fortress began to change rapidly. It split open from the middle, revealing a ferocious mouth that bit the side of the sun ship. Steel rubbed against each other, and sparks flew out from the armor. Countless spinning blades and sharp blades pierced deeply into the armor of the Crimson Dragon. No matter how much the Crimson Dragon roared and struggled, its thick arm had already grabbed the body of the main cannon and forcefully broke it apart. Under Raymond's Supreme, the armor began to repair rapidly, but it could only delay the time. They were already in the grip of the Hell Workshop, and it was difficult for them to break free. The workshop master pulled the hub and laughed loudly. With a hatred that could not wait to devour their bones and skin, the fortress-like factory opened its mouth wide, and countless transmission belts and assembly lines continuously swallowed the stripped armor into its stomach. Of course, the bomb that Huaishur threw out was also included. Kacha! A crisp sound rang out. In the blink of an eye, blazing flames spurted out from the mouth, together with countless broken saw blades and structures. It was like a torrent, as if vomiting, but at this moment the deck shook violently and retreated to both sides. A high platform slowly rose from the darkness, revealing a familiar figure. There was also a Fong in his hand. "Hello, mongrel." Huaishur waved her right hand to show off her forging furnace and asked curiously, "What's the matter? You still remember this?" At that moment, as if countless painful memories were evoked, a furious roar rang out from the steel workshop's loudspeaker. Then it turned into an out-and-out painful wail, because with a flash, a Fong, which was infused with all the origin substance in Huaishur's hand and turned everything into mass, had already smashed into the face in front of the castle. The terrifying quality of the stone essence hall was entrusted to the whip of the long truncheon. In an instant, a huge crack was torn open from top to bottom, causing the originally ugly and swollen face to become even more sinister as it spasmed and twitched. After the crack, smelly oil and fuel spilled out like blood. That's why, don't be happy too early. Huaishur gave a serious advice. You have to understand, what the Sunmaker can do, I can do too. And sometimes, he bent down slightly as if preparing to sprint, and smiled. I will do better than her. Chapter 1065. There was a moment of deathly stillness. Even the workshop owner found it hard to believe. Perhaps they were shocked by his arrogance. Such shameless boasting. A mere third-level cultivator actually dared to stand shoulder to shoulder with the ruler. But for some reason, when Huaishur said those words, the workshop owner couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. It was as if that D*MNB*TCH was standing right in front of him. But it was different from that damned woman. She was always expressionless, even when she was killing and destroying. But Huaishur was different. Even when he was surrounded by enemies 10 times or 100 times their number, and countless deaths were happening right before his eyes, he still maintained that unsettling smile. His empty fingers clenched slightly. Without any warning, a slender sword appeared in his hand. Following his movements, resplendent light gathered, and the light of the virtuous sword shot out. It tore through the eternal night of hell. The divinity that was blessed by the King of Light was poured into it, and it shone with a brilliance and light that was dozens of times brighter than before. It floated up into the sky as if it was nothing, and it cut through the eternal dark clouds and fog. The dazzling light stung everyone's eyes. But before the workshop owner could react, Huaishur stepped forward and slashed down with the sword. The workshop roared. Within the control room, the workshop master howled angrily as he pulled down a lever, causing the large, blurry mouth to spit out countless white bubbles. The viscous bubbles flew through the air like a rapidly growing fence, absorbing all of the origin substance calamity chi, and even the infernal realm's precipitation rapidly growing. But when that majestic light flashed past, not only the others, but even the workshop owner was stunned. It was like an illusion. There was no damage at all. Only the shrill sound of the wind seemed to come from afar, and the workshop owner's face instantly flushed red. That seemingly terrifying and majestic slash of light was nothing more than a facade. It was just for show. Sorry, I took the wrong one. Huaishur smiled apologetically, and the illusion of the virtuous sword in his right hand dissipated. Then, a sharp blade shot out from his left hand, hidden at his waist. It should be this, he said. Resentment. The crow's cause disappeared in a flash. In the blink of an eye, the resentment had pierced through the bubble's defense against origin substance and energy, crossing the almost non-existent distance between them and burrowing into the massive face at the front of the fortress. The 49.9-meter-long Imperial God Blade was blood red. Countless feather-like patterns appeared on the edge of the blade. Even the sound of metal scraping against metal sounded like the screeching of iron crows. Sweep. Under the support of mastery, symphony, it was as if even the humming of the sun ship under his feet was integrated into Huaishur's body, bursting forth with endless power along with him. High temperature and vibrations suddenly burst out from Huaishur's body, tearing apart the jacket and shirt on his upper body, revealing his steel-like arms. He gripped the blade tightly. A power that was comparable to this exaggerated level burst forth from his hands, pressing down the blade inch by inch. It tore through all obstacles like a hot knife through butter, leaving a new crack on the distorted face, crisscrossing like a cross. The huge mouth that was originally biting down on the sun ship was torn apart by this swift and fierce sweep. Immediately after, as Huaishur turned around, the blade spun around like a dance, contracting and expanding once again, chopping down on the workshop's mechanical arms that were clamping down on the sun ship. As a result, the miserable screams didn't stop, bursting forth with a new climax. When the two giant arms were torn apart, the workshop's fortress found it difficult to clamp down on the sun ship's movements. Under the terrifying power of full power propulsion, even the steel was emitting a distorted wail. Break free from the cage. Just like that, in front of that furious and distorted face, the sun ship rose into the air once again, riding on the ripples of the underworld river and speeding away. Don't even think about it. Don't even think about it. The workshop owner roared. The fortress's massive body quickly turned around, and its thick arms stretched out, tightly grabbing onto the ship's tail. Countless ropes stretched out from the cracks in the arms, coiling around the ship as if they were alive and contracting. It didn't care about the cannon fire. The sun ship suddenly became sluggish, and its speed came to an abrupt stop once again. The dragon's bones trembled violently, and the distorted steel produced waves of resounding and sharp sounds. At this moment, he no longer cared about saving costs. Even though his heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife, the workshop owner had already come to the realization that he had no choice but to bleed heavily. From the moment they set off until now, even in the process of waiting, this workshop was still operating continuously, constantly accumulating products. Plunder, production, dumping. This was something that was engraved into the instincts of every workshop owner. It was this endless thirst for benefits, as well as the huge profits brought about by monopolizing technology, that made the workshop owners of Hell the rulers. At the peak, with the first 19 rulers as the foundation, countless branch workshops were distributed in different depths. With supply chains and trade contracts between them as connections, they formed a huge production organization that covered the deep regions to the dark abyss regions. The more there were, the stronger the power they could display. Even if they had to fight against established powers like a fallen country or the corrupt order, they weren't afraid at all. Regretfully, there was no possibility of harmonious coexistence between workshop owners. The more they gathered in one place, the more benefits and rewards they demanded. If the benefits brought by the outside world couldn't satisfy their greed, they would start internal strife. Sometimes they would even nibble at each other before the war even started. Therefore, most of the time, they were scattered in different places, constantly dumping products in different hells, plundering huge profits. After using this profit to strengthen themselves, they would plunder more until they owned the entire abyss. It should have been like this. But in the previous War of Worlds, after the defeat in the decisive battle with the Sea of Lightning, the situation began to take a turn for the worse. Before the pain of being stabbed in the back by the Eternal Frost Core had dissipated, the bitch who had once rejected their invitation had actually broken free from her cage. Since then, life had been difficult. Once upon a time, they had chosen to invest generously because they saw the potential of the Sunmaker. Now, when the woman who went against the rules of production started to take revenge, they once again deeply felt the pain born from this eternal hatred. In less than half a year, the revitalization plan they had prepared for a long time died in the womb. Number 14, Number 9, and Number 5, among the remaining 10 rulers in the production sequence, 3 of them were thrown into the Eternal Frost Core by her, losing all their property and profits in eternal torture. As the direct supplier and subgroup of Number 14, if Number 77 couldn't prove its ability and efficiency in a short period of time, it would probably be completely merged by Number 1. After losing its independence and trademark, it would be forced into bankruptcy and liquidation. At that time, not only would his factory be forcefully merged into Number 1's Eternal World Group, even he himself would become a machine that processed endless reports for Number 1 in the cubicle under the terms of loans and debts in the contract. This was his only chance. The moment he pulled down the red joystick, while enduring the pain in his heart, the huge face on the animated fortress suddenly widened its eyes. Hot steam spewed out from its mouth and nose, and countless bright red streamers sprinkled down from the top of the factory along with loud and impassioned music. From this moment onwards, the Hell Shopping Festival began. Countless murmurs and high-pitched screeches echoed in the ears of every living creature, endlessly repeating the countless preferential policies. 1,000 off 1,000. 800 off 800. Rare opportunity can't be missed. Trillions of subsidies. Discount. Disaster broadcast. Buy 2 and get 1 free. Interest-free silicone wife. Limited reservation for out-of-print ruler statue. Get a voucher now to participate in the 0 yuan rush sale. And so on. Countless strange voices rose and fell, stirring up every rational soul, bringing with them endless temptation. As the overwhelming advertisements spread out, the big mouth on the fortress once again opened to a terrifying extent. Countless packages of various sizes spewed out from the assembly line like a torrential rain. Clearance of the warehouse. Those cardboard boxes with strange legs and feet converged into a tide, falling from the sky and instantly covering the entire deck of Sunship. When the cardboard packages were opened, countless strange bubbles with a foul stench overflowed from them. Even though there were countless palpitating silhouettes that were constantly changing, the malice and malevolence within were hard to conceal. The instant they appeared, they began to rapidly corrode the deck of the ship, connecting with each other and forming a silhouette that was between reality and illusion, almost covering more than half of Sunship within. If what was promoted in countless flyers and advertisements was a luxurious dream that could only be bought by exhausting all assets and borrowing, then at this moment, what was produced by the workshop was an out-and-out nightmare. The eternal nightmares extracted from solidified souls one after another were finally processed and divided before being painted into a beautiful form bewitching one unlucky soul after another until they also became a part of the product. There was no need for after-sales service, no need for a 3-pack certificate, and no need for any standard verification. The moment the customer purchased the product, they had already become a new product. This was the business rule of hell. Number 77, Nightmare Workshop. At this moment, the endless nightmares merged into one in the bubbles, forming a strange and huge monster that began to rapidly devour Sunship. Under the assimilation of the nightmare, the thick armor gradually became transparent and was pulled into the nightmare bit by bit on the collapsed deck. Weisher could almost imagine Raymond screaming miserably as if he had lost his parents. But at this moment, he no longer cared about dealing with the attack and erosion from the workshop owner, because an out-and-out threat was right in front of him, descending from the sky. When the glorious wings slowly retracted, the ruler slowly raised his sorrowful face and raised the spear, sword, and shield in his hand. He aimed at the prey in front of him. "Give up resistance, outsider," he announced solemnly. "Only then can you walk up the altar of my Lord in the most complete state." Behind him, countless hunting angels turned into dark clouds and pounced down from the sky. They began to attack fiercely from the workshop owner's devouring. The torment nights, shrouded in gray fog, had turned into a torrent that swept toward the broken ship. In the sky, on the ground, in all directions, they were all enemies. There was no way for them to escape. In a short silence, Weisher looked around and was full of curiosity. Seriously, can the situation be worse? As if hearing his expectations and calls, the generous hell satisfied all his wishes about disaster. In terms of making people despair, the abyss never made people despair. Above the shattered sky, there was suddenly a loud rumble. A galloping lightning suddenly appeared, accompanied by the sea breeze and the stench of fresh blood. A 3-meter-tall giant appeared at the end of the deck. All the hunting angels and torment knights around him were incinerated into ashes by the electric light emanating from his body. It was Skullhunter from the Sea of Thunder, a twin dwarf blessed by the 2 rulers of the growth moon and the dark tide. Holding a heavy battle axe in his hand, he raised his 2 completely different heads and looked around. Who is Weisher? Although he asked this, his 2 pairs of eyes had already locked onto Weisher's position and stared at his head, full of hunger and desire. "Yes, that's right, it's me." In the final silence before the arrival of the great battle, Weisher raised his hand and asked curiously, "Let me ask, do you have the habit of first come, first served?" For example, he glanced at the ruler in front of him and the twin dwarfs behind him and suggested, "Line up." In that instant, the Dominator's mask of compassion and the twin dwarfs' faces both revealed the same sinister smile. The answer was no. Chapter 1066. In that instant, thunder rumbled and the heavens shook. The entire upper deck of the Sunship was suddenly covered by a storm. Dark, purple lightning and strange, sinister, holy light burst forth at the same time. There was no such thing as righteousness in the pugilistic world, and no one had the courtesy to line up one by one. To deal with a righteous sect, everyone decisively chose to work together, taking advantage of his weakness to take his life. Even if they were surrounded and determined to win, they didn't show the slightest bit of carelessness. However, the expected clumsiness and wretched dodging did not appear. On the contrary, in that instant, regardless of whether it was the ruler or the Skullhunter, they all had a strange illusion. It was as if they were the ones being besieged. The instant they came into contact, they were shocked by the storm-like counterattack, retreating several dozen meters at the same time, returning to their original positions. They widened their eyes in shock. What's wrong? Weisher still stood in his original position, as if nothing had happened, full of doubt. Didn't you say you were going to attack together?" He paused for a moment, and then asked mockingly, "Could it be that you are tired from the journey and are not acclimatized? Why don't you rest for a while, and I'll order some takeout for you?" The disdain and mockery that flowed out from his bones did not incite the enemy's anger, but in that instant, regardless of whether it was the ruler or the twin dwarfs, they all rushed forward again. They went all out. As they galloped at lightning speed, the twin skull hunter's mouth, nose, and eyes surged with dazzling light. The blazing red battle axe in his hand quickly swelled, melting molten iron, and like a sword being unsheathed, eternal lightning shot out from the depths of the sea of lightning. Compared to true lightning, it was nothing more than a short several dozen meters long. However, at this moment, wherever the lightning condensed from countless calamities past, the thick armor and ruins on Sun's ship were torn apart like bubbles, turning into dust. The ruler, who held a spear, sword, and shield shrouded in holy light, was like a meteor falling from the sky, dragging a blazing tail behind it, brazenly advancing from the front, not leaving behind the slightest opening. But no matter which one it was, what responded to them was a merciless sword. In this brief moment, the Huaishur in their eyes seemed to have lost his silhouette, turning into an amorphous shadow. Within the emaciated body, the origin substance's attributes were constantly changing. Light and shadow intersected, stacking together to create an ambiguous and complicated chaos. Unfathomable. However, the moment he touched her, the ambiguous superposition state was broken. Immediately after, it was a torrential counterattack. It was as though he had gained 3 heads and 8 arms in an instant. The hammer of pain collided with the axe of thunder, causing dazzling sparks to fly. But right after that, resentment and hatred suddenly pierced through this extremely narrow gap, nimbly flying towards the necks of the 2 heads, leaving behind deep gouges that were so deep that their bones could be seen. However, at the same time, Ah Fong raised his hand from Huaishur's hand and hacked down on the incoming shield. Mountains collapsed and rivers flowed in reverse. Pure mass smashed a crack in the perfect defense. Immediately after, Bai Lu's phantom image flashed, and the spear of compassion had already parried the ruler's spear. It pierced straight through, piercing a deep gash in the ruler's chest behind the armor. Blood surged. This was no longer within the range of a cord that could instantly attack a single target multiple times. In front of these 2 crown warriors who had experienced hundreds of battles, Su Chun was fighting 1 against 2. He was even simultaneously executing complex blocks and counterattacks without any order. The flow of power and the coordination between his weapons were flawless. He was clearly one person, but in that instant, it was as if 7 different ascendants had surrounded and attacked 2 opponents who had stepped into the realm of reality. Have you heard of a symphony before? In the midst of this intense battle of life and death, they suddenly heard Huaishur's words. His words were flat and straightforward, without any ups and downs. But in front of them, the eyes of the young man who had appeared suddenly lit up with flames. It was as if a deep abyss had been ignited, wild and tyrannical. He looked disdainfully at everything in front of him. Just treat it as an impromptu public lecture. The rope of sorrow shot out like a snake, binding the ruler's armor and suppressing it for a moment. The hammer of pain smashed down, dispersing the mighty holy light. At the same time, Ah Fong rushed forward, colliding with the lightning axe. Angry flames swept across, and the axes rubbed against each other, bursting into sparks. Just like that, he personally demonstrated the essence of art to the layman in front of him. Even for those who had never come into contact with it, something like a symphony was too complicated and too distant. But no matter who it was, through this experience, they would be able to deeply understand the beauty of it, right? Closing one's eyes, it was as if one could feel the vast symphony sweeping in from all directions. String section, woodwind section, brass section, percussion section, and color instrument section. Countless subtle changes were hidden within close proximity, constantly changing. The so-called symphony was built on this foundation, a behemoth composed of countless single tunes. Now, anger, sorrow, regret, resentment, pain. 7 different tones were combined into one in Weischer's hands, turning into a torrent. Even if his hands could not cover everything, under the command of his heart, countless afterimages appeared on the stage that he had set, responding to his command, playing the melody, even if it was just for a brief moment. At this moment, he had completely turned himself into the entrance to the returning ruins. Great Si Ming's afterimage emerged from the entrance at an astonishing speed. After being equipped with origin substance equipment, he brazenly launched an attack on the enemy. Even if they only had the strength for a single attack, when the afterimages dissipated, new afterimages would appear from the ultimate, as if it would never stop. This was a brand new application that Weischer had developed from his own Supreme, a brand new domain that transcended the boundaries of drummers and Emperor-used steps. Get ready, both of you. In the brief interval, Weischer wiped away the viscous blood that was seeping out of his nostrils, ignoring the side effects without a care in the world. But now, I'm an orchestra all by myself. In that instant, the light of burning origin equipment burst out from his eyes. Under the protection of countless afterimages, the symphony reached its climax. However, what the ruler and skull hunter could not accept was not this skill that was beyond common sense, but Weischer's upper limit. With such an unimaginable consumption rate, even if he had 10 times more origin equipment, it should have been depleted long ago. How could there be so much energy to support Weischer's extravagance? Until one of the twin dwarfs glanced outside the sun ship. Only then did they see the shockingly huge shadow. On the battlefield, under the cover of the flock of crows, the gravitational force of ruins and quickly spread, pulling all the shattered souls and scattered origin substances into the eternal darkness, and once again refining them into pure shadow crystals in the furnace fire. At this moment, all the opponents blocking in front of Weischer were using their own lives to provide the best conditions for him. War was not his enemy, but his companion. Death would not take away anything from him, but would instead provide him with an endless supply of power. Now, when the drum beats of the hammer of agony dissipated in the air, a terrifying melody was born from Weischer's free and unrestrained play. It was an ancient and classic narrative song, an endless poem that described death and parting. Its name was Demon King. At this moment, on the bridge of the sun ship, Raymond's ear-piercing cries were still spreading. F***CK, F***CK, F***CK. Help! They're coming in! They're coming in! The tool man, who was wrapped in layers of cables, shouted in horror. Weischer, save me! The sound of armor cracking rose and fell. In front, there was the devouring and infiltration of the Hell Workshop Master. Behind, there was the forceful attack of the Hunting Angels and the Torment Knights, and there was also a group of endless ratmen harassing them. No matter how fierce the warship was, it could not withstand such attacks. After the topmost deck was broken, several cracks that led directly to the interior had already appeared. Now, even if the defensive gate was put down, and they were isolated in the middle layer, they would not be able to hold on for long. They would either be completely dissolved by the nightmare of the workshop master, or be completely annihilated by the Hell Army that attacked from both sides. There was no good outcome left or right. Ming Ming was already prepared to face death, but when death was at hand, Raymond began to panic, especially now that he was still bound to the chair by his own sacred mark and could not move. At least let people move and resist. You can shut the F***ck up. The red dragon angrily stuffed a source substance pipe into his throat. Eat all of it. Not a single drop is left. Now, almost all of the source substance reserves had been poured into Raymond's stomach, under the support of the supreme tier of the source blood's qualitative change. The skyrocketing blue bar was rapidly transforming into a health bar to repair the gap on the ship. Unfortunately, even if it was a temporary emergency repair, it would not last long. If this continued, it was only a matter of time before it was broken. Even so, they still had to fight for time. From the hands of the enemy, at this moment, the internal structure of the sun ship was constantly changing and reorganizing. Everything that was not important was destroyed in the rough dismantling by their own people. The huge and complicated secret instrument, as Gregory hurriedly arranged it, slowly revealed its own outline, slowly reading its own progress. Loud cracking sounds burst out one after another. In the narrow corridor, the hunting angels had already swarmed in, violently destroying everything in sight. Finally, their line of sight fell on the last barrier in front of them. At that moment, the defensive gate that was dozens of meters thick actually slowly rose up. It opened a path to the core for the outsiders. But when the hungry invaders rushed into the shockingly wide space, what they saw was a towering iron wall. The suffocating array was waiting in front of them. On the pitch-black helmet, there were still traces of paint that had not dried on the emblem belonging to the celestial genealogy. The huge body of more than 2 meters was covered in thick armor. From head to toe, there was not a single gap exposed to the air. In their hands, the monster-level 30mm caliber machine guns that had just been distributed from the assembly line were still reflecting a blue light, and right in front of the strict array, there was a large dirty doll standing. In the pitch-black mouth hole, accompanied by the scattering of green smoke, a hand holding a cigarette reached out and flicked the ash. He also greeted the visitors cordially. Surprise, another Fuker. Chapter 10, 67. When the burning cigarette was slightly raised between the two slender fingers, there were countless crisp sounds gathered together, turning into the thunder before the storm. The thunder resounded, and countless blazing flashes burst out from the darkness. The park guards stepped forward and pushed the iron wall forward. In their hands, the autocannons spun, wildly spitting out smoke, light, and even heavy steel, without any processing or modification. The bullets that had just been loaded into the cartridge box from the assembly line were just the most common cursed iron. However, when the metal explosives inside were ignited by the runes in the gun's chamber, countless coarse iron pieces swirled along the rifling and rubbed until they turned red. Now, the red rainstorm was pouring down. It whipped the air, the ceiling, the deck, and even everything in front. The fog of the burning metal explosives rose up, and the high-temperature mercury vapor drifted in the enclosed space, shining like a light mist. It fell on the dirty ragdoll clothes, and after burning away the old dirt, it seemed that even the ragdoll clothes covered in patches became bright and beautiful. What's that saying again? The ragdoll clothes spat out a mouthful of green smoke from the big mouth. Looking around at the hunting angels who were crazily pouncing on them in the storm, thought for a moment, and sighed softly. Holy! Boom! The iron wall guards stepped forward again, and after throwing away the overheated autocannons, they pulled out their axes and halberds from behind and shouted fanatically along with Kitten's words. Stepping on the sticky blood under their feet, they moved forward, and the killing began again. On the other side of the sunship, the corridor that was less than 1 meter wide had long been dyed scarlet with blood, and the gathered Nagas began to counterattack again. Even if it was a one-sided massacre, the cold-blooded Nagas seemed to not know what fear and panic were. They rushed to the invincible opponents one after another, using their own lives to buy a short time for their loyal followers. The pool of blood spread like a river. "Sir, please come with me." The elder raised the bone blade and slashed cleanly. The twisted and sealed door in front of him was torn apart, opening a gap for the elder behind him. Behind the door, in the narrow cabin, countless instruments were emitting sparks and smoke. The broken circuit triggered the explosion of the oxygen production equipment, and the broken transmission shaft of the auxiliary engine had flown out dozens of meters away. The twisted shaft pierced into the cabin, and black oil dripped from it. "Clean up the scene immediately." Anton in the protective suit turned around, and the cyborgs with oxygen masks rushed in one by one, violently overturning the irrelevant things and pushing them aside, revealing the huge engine that was still running crazily in the center. The terrifying heat spread like a furnace. The temperature inside the cylinder is out of control, and it is about to explode. Anton roared, "Red Dragon, turn off the power." The temperature control module and subcontrol mainframe have been damaged, Professor. The Red Dragon reported. "Please retreat immediately, Professor. I will start the ejection program later." Ejection? Why? Isn't it? If the temperature control module can't be fixed, then do it manually. Anton stepped forward as if he didn't hear anything. He pulled out the axe outside the toolbox, and the kinetic skeleton was operating at full power. He slashed with all his strength, tearing the wall apart and violently cutting off the pipes buried inside. Suddenly, turbulent water gushed out, violently pouring on the surface of the cylinder that was about to melt, turning into thick steam, cooling down the large engine in such a reckless way that the high temperature had gone out of control, left the possibility of an explosion behind. There's still time, just a little more time." The elder ran away from the axe in his hand and staggered forward in the thick steam. He pressed his hands on the red-hot engine, and an ear-piercing sound kept bursting out. Countless machines seemed to be endowed with life, breaking through the ceiling, falling down, and once again connecting to the wheel cabin. Like an electric pacemaker attached to the heart, it once again injected new vitality into the unit that was on the verge of collapse. "Connect the new transmission shaft to me, quickly!" He raised his head and shouted. "There's no time, Professor." The Red Dragon reported, "Area B2 is about to fall. In order to protect the inner unit, we have to seal off the entire area. Please retreat immediately." "Then seal it off. Don't worry about me." Anton roared. Through the mask that was covered with mist, his eyes seemed to have been burned red by the engine. 10 minutes. Give me 10 minutes." The Red Dragon was silent for a moment. Then, a familiar voice sounded from outside the cabin door behind him. 10 minutes, right? Forster took off the cigarette that was wet from the steam at the corner of his mouth and threw it on the floor. "Do what he said. I'll think of a way for the rest." "Then 15 minutes, Professor Anton corrected without turning his head. "Maybe 20 minutes. Hey, don't increase the price." Forster shrugged, helplessly. "We agreed on 15 minutes, no more." He sighed softly, looking at the torn door at the end of the corridor and the tormented knights with scarlet eyes shrouded in gray fog. The pitch-black armored knights slowly stepped forward, the blades in their hands already covered in blood. Forster lowered his head and loaded 2 brand new deer-hunting bullets into the gun chamber. Finally, he measured the distance between them, put the shotgun on his shoulder, pulled out the curved hunting knife from his waist, and held it upside down. In the silence, there was only the sound of a large amount of water gushing out of the pipe, like the echoing sound of the tide. Suddenly, it was as if they had returned to the blue sea and blue sky. A moist breeze, mixed with the smell of blood blew from afar. "I really want to go surfing," Forster murmured softly and narrowed his eyes. In front of him, The gray fog was like a wave, vast and mighty. On the deck, in the midst of the chaotic struggle, the performance of the movement suddenly paused for a moment, and Weischer finally staggered back a step. Sticky blood flowed down from his nose and fell on the cracked deck, spreading endless curses, dyeing the entire area into a pool of poison. But the poison that was enough to kill a large group of people in hell was just a small inconvenience to the enemy in front of him. In comparison, it was not even comparable to the deep cuts and wounds on their bodies, arms, chest, neck, and even one eye. The twin dwarves held the axe of thunder, moving around like lightning as if they did not know fatigue and pain. The ruler had already run away, the cumbersome and broken shield in his hand, and his 4 arms were holding a spear, a long sword, and 2 short knives pulled out from his back. Surrounded by layers of afterimages, Weischer raised his hand and wiped away the blood from the corner of his eyes, mouth, and nose. He did not care, even if Great Sea Ming's stigmata was reaching its limit. "Hey, can you guys do it?" He looked up and sneered. "Are you going to be killed by me even when 2 against 1? The ruler was speechless. The long sword and short knife in his hand suddenly turned upside down, piercing through the cracks on his armor and into his body. The metal dissolved and surged as if it was alive. Like a great tonic, it was chewed and swallowed by the body, and a dazzling light shot out from his mouth and nose. Then the archangel's 4 arms held the dazzling spear, and like a comet, his body was covered in blazing flames as he pushed forward. The freezing wind from the sea of lightning spread out. The Gemini gnomes raised their battle axes high and roared loudly. Their 2 mouths chanted the praises of the growing moon and the dark tide. The Gemini gnomes bathed in lightning, and their bodies expanded once again. In their hands, the branch of thunder was also rapidly growing, splitting, and in the end, it was as if a tree of thunder was held in their hands, violently slashing. An unprecedentedly huge pressure came. Ah Fong swept up the blood tide on the battlefield and swept it towards the lightning. The surging liquid was filled with the weight of the stone marrow hall, and it crashed down from hundreds of meters away. On the sword of virtue, flames rose again. In the short gap created by the blade of the axe and the spear, a dazzling stream of light flew out, colliding with the calamitous star that the ruler had turned into. Weischer raised his hand and guided the afterimage to play a brand new climax. However, that magnificent ensemble came to an abrupt stop at this moment. An ordinary bone blade protruded from Weischer's chest. In the shadows, the Knight of Torment, whose body was wrapped in gray fog, slowly appeared. However, unlike the other knights, he did not wear a ferocious helmet. His messy long hair draped over his face, and his beard was unshaven. He looked very dispirited. That withered face seemed to be filled with eternal sorrow and tiredness. He hated everything in the world, and he hated himself. The champion of sorrow. After hiding for a long time, the crown wearer seized the only opening and stabbed with his sword. Even the premonition of death could not detect the spying and attack from the shadows. In an instant, the sword pierced through the heart. Lightning slashed down, and a comet crashed down. Waves of air swept out. But soon, the 2 figures were sent flying. The afterimage did not stop at all, and his counterattack was not shaken by this sudden stab. And Weischer's palm was already tightly holding the blade that pierced through his chest. "Hello, nice to meet you." Weischer slowly turned his head and asked the visitor behind him in confusion, "Why don't you introduce yourself first?" After hitting the target, the champion of sorrow did not hesitate to let go and retreated. But the chains that extended from Weischer's shadow wrapped around his legs and slowed him down for a moment. Then Weischer's left hand clenched, and the blade of the spear of compassion appeared and pierced through his own body in reverse. The bone blade and the spreading curse were instantly torn apart, and it followed the face of the champion of sorrow. On that eternally sorrowful face, a curved scar was left. It was like a smile. You should smile more. Like me, people who like to smile have good luck. Huaisha reached out and pulled out the broken bone blade from the hole in his chest. He looked up and let out a long breath. Look, I was a little out of breath, but I didn't expect someone to open a hole for me. It's really refreshing. The champion of sorrow did not smile. Under the armor all over his body, there was a murky sound. The scar on his face quickly shrank, and sharp bone spikes grew out from the cracks of the armor. Finally, a ferocious halberd appeared in his hand, and he pointed it at Huaisha's face, together with the other enemies. Now, with 3 times the number of enemies, 3 times the surprise. In the short silence, Huaisha's vision turned dark. When he heard the roars and the sounds of fighting under his feet and behind him, he could not help but be absent-minded for a moment. It was as if the remnant of the past here had appeared in front of his eyes again. Were their roars now the same as the cries for the future in the past? Fighting, fighting, and blood. After 70 years, Huaisha was standing on the land where the ancestors fought. The scars they left behind were here, the same as his own scars. Because of this, he felt indescribable joy and satisfaction. It was as if he was fighting side by side with the deceased. His own war had just begun. The war that belonged to them was still going on. Therefore, he could not lose. Let us once again become enemies with the abyss. Huaisha raised his hand, licked the blood on his fingertips, and whispered softly to the heroic souls buried in this land. Please look at me. Please with me. As the scars shrank, the flames of origin substance appeared in Huaisha's eyes again. As if he was accompanied by an army of 10,000, he proudly spread his arms, showing the enemies everything he had. Come. Huaisha raised his head and declared war on them. Let me experience the power of hell. There was no need to say anything else. At that moment, the ruler, the twin dwarfs, the champion of sorrow, and the crowns from various hells raised their weapons and attacked the remnants of the utopia in front of them. A storm swept across. In the spreading airwaves, the blades of swords and spears swept across. The piercing light of metal constantly tore the darkness apart and defeated the light of gods. 1 against 3. Even though he was seriously injured, he did not feel afraid. On the contrary, his heart was surging. The light of the stars from the past was still shining on his shoulders, laughing with him as he launched a counterattack against the enemies in front of him. Saber, sword, spear, axe, hammer, truncheon, rope. They had clearly become familiar with Huaisha's weapons in this fierce battle, but at this moment, the crowns felt an unprecedented pressure. Under the combined attacks, the will hidden within the origin substance equipment continued to rise, burning along with the burning of his soul. It became more and more violent, more and more strange, and more difficult to predict, but weapons were still weapons in the end. The champion of sorrow, who had experienced tens of thousands of battles, did not waver. The halberd in his hand swept across, as if he was exchanging injuries for injuries. He actually forcefully locked the changes in Huaisha's moves, creating a gap for the others to attack. After an intense battle, they had already seen the gap between the weapons and found a way to deal with it. The truncheon's whip was thunderous and could not be blocked head-on, but it could still be dodged calmly. The bloodthirsty blade of hatred had to be deflected and blocked to guard against the change in the blade's length. The spear was light and agile, and the long-distance stabs were too swift. They needed to be prepared in advance. The virtuous sword's attacks were very troublesome. They needed to close the distance and suppress it now. After forcefully blocking Fang's attack, the twin giants retreated a step. The lightning tree in their hands expanded once again as they smashed down. The sorrowful face, and the rulers seemed to have a tacit understanding. They attacked from both sides, sealing off the gaps in Huaishur's dodging, not hesitating to be heavily injured by the pain and resentment. But in the instant that Huaishur waved his hand, they saw a black shadow fly out from his hand. It instantly expanded, nimbly circling around their blockade like a snake, instantly destroying the lightning that had just lit up. Tragic roars sounded out. The twin dwarfs staggered backwards. One of their heads had already been smashed to pieces by this unexpected attack. Having lost the support of the lightning tree, the ruler and the sorrowful face's attacks were a step too slow. At this moment, under the counterattack of the shadow, deep cracks appeared on their chests and right hands, revealing bone. They instantly retreated a step. It was only now that they could clearly see the thing in Huaishur's hand. It seemed to contain endless sorrow and pain. The wolf head hammer dragged along snake-like chains, surpassing the speed of sound. It moved horizontally in the air, letting out a series of loud rumbling sounds. That was a flail. This happened too suddenly. I'm really sorry. In front of them, Huaishur lowered his head and glanced at the flail in his hand. He helplessly shrugged. Look at you guys. You scared me to the point of leveling up. Chapter 1068. Joy had to be shared. Especially for newbies, when they drew a card that they didn't recognize, they would usually open the chat group called the Big Shots and ask if the card was useful. This was normal. When one person's joy was shared, it would become the joy of two people. Only by sharing generously could a better world be created. There was nothing more precious than this in the world, and it was even more so for Great Seeming. But it wasn't just that. He would share more. Pain, resentment, regret, anger, sadness, and even death. At this moment, under the entanglement of the giant snake and the wolf head, the young man with the flail smiled as usual, and he didn't even wipe the blood off his face. Under the shadow of the strange wind, all the enemies felt a chill from the bottom of their hearts. You're not coming? Huaishur stepped forward and stepped on the cracked floor. Then I'll go over. In an instant, the darkness of death rushed toward them. In the endless flickering shadows, the Dominator, the Gemini twins, and even the sorrowful champion felt a chill in their faces. Which one was real? It was meaningless. Now, it was no longer a 3-on-1 battle. Instead, it was a 1-on-1 battle, and even a 1-on-3 battle. In the blink of an eye, in the roar that broke the speed of sound, the flail with the wolf head and snake body had already wrapped around the thunder tree, restraining the violent power. When the flail rubbed against each other, dazzling sparks burst out, but the hammerhead smashed toward the back of the Dominator's head from an incredible angle. The sorrowful champion's expression was still haggard. Even though he was shocked, he still maintained his calm. The halberd in his hand suddenly pierced through the shadows in front of him, and he seized the critical moment to counterattack. However, after the afterimage dissipated, a ferocious halberd suddenly pierced towards him. The light of the blazing flames illuminated his numb face, causing his empty eyes to be filled with shock. Anger and compassion were combined here. The heavy axe extended from the tip of the spear and turned into a genuine super-long heavy weapon. It tore through the lightning and holy light and stirred up the universe. The instant the axe of anger and the spear of compassion merged, they formed a brand new appearance. Halberd! Knock, pull, enter. As Huaishur's wrists shook, it was as if two angry pythons were entangled together. The moment the halberd straightened, countless fine cracks appeared on the bone halberd in the hands of the sad man. In an instant, it broke through and pierced through his shoulder armor. The stench of blood gushed out and turned into countless mosquitoes and flies in the air. Then they withered and dissipated in the thick fragrance of flowers on the halberd. Sorrowful countenance did not waver. he charged forward and forcefully squeezed into the inner area of the halberd. Then he pulled out 2 more short swords from his newly grown bones. In front of his eyes, the halberd's silhouette quickly dissipated, replaced by a sweeping wave of resentment and virtue. Huaishur stepped forward. Their arms collided. Bones and sharp blades rubbed against each other. Sparks flew, illuminating each other's pitch-black eyes. One was numb and empty, while the other was burning like fire. After a short moment of restraint, Huaishur completely abandoned the remaining 2 people beside him. Ignoring them, he pulled a sorrowful face and launched a fierce attack. Accompanied by a short turn when he stepped and turned around, the sword and the bone blade rubbed against each other, producing 2 fine sparks. Then, after Huaishur's hands drew a subtle arc, the ends of the blades collided. The blades of virtue and hatred howled, and the crows were bathed in light. In an instant, the blades and swords combined into one, forming a long, strange weapon that looked like a paddle. It spun in Huaishur's hand, setting off a storm of blood and fierce light. Centrifugal force. In that instant, Huaishur seemed to have lost his own silhouette in front of his sorrowful eyes. What replaced it was a raging tornado that rapidly expanded. The storm of blades raged in all directions, and everything in its path was cut into pieces by the sharp blades. With just a flick of his finger, the bone blade, which was covered in cracks, was smashed into pieces. It tore his chest apart and pinned him to the ground. The ruler howled, not hesitating to forcefully endure the impact of the wolf's flail. He endured the dizziness caused by the turbulent origin substance and charged forward. This was not the so-called tacit understanding and restraint between teammates. Rather, it was a choice that made them feel cold without each other. If Huaishur killed Sorrowful Face here, then the 2 of them would undoubtedly be next. Sorrowful Face, who had been pierced by the virtue sword, opened his mouth. His eyes, ears, mouth, and nose began to glow with a deep purple light as he flew towards Huaishur. The dwarf skull hunter, who had awakened from the death of his kin, had bloodshot eyes. He hid the hymns of thunder and lightning in his lonely eyes as he offered up the last of his kin's soul and strength to the sea of eternal death. The lightning in his hands grew explosively as he swept it across. The outline of the hammer of pain appeared once again. Rage, reload! The blood-red hammer spat out a blazing tail of flames as it smashed towards the lightning axe. The instant they collided, the boundless rage contained within the hammer shot out along with the flames. Explosion! The lightning and fire collided, causing a powerful gust of wind and shockwaves to surge outwards. The lightning branch, which had grown in size, was actually destroyed in an instant. Amidst the rumbling of the explosion, the sound of waves could be heard once again. The light of the virtue sword was attached to it, and a majestic giant sword appeared in Huaishur's hand. It was as if the 9 continents' iron had been used to forge this hatred. Countless enormous waves of the past appeared on the gloomy blade. In an instant, the stream of light that Sorrowful Face had spat out was swallowed up. Immediately afterwards, the weight of the 7 seas, as if it could strike down the entire world, descended upon the ruler. The ruler, who had been charging over like a meteor, slammed into the iron wall. The spear in his hand cracked in the middle, and a deep crack appeared on the armor in front of his chest. Pitch-black blood spurted out as he flew backwards. But before he could fly into the air, a hand roughly grabbed his ankle and pulled him back. He flew through the air in an arc before smashing into the ground. He raised his foot and stomped down. Boom! The silhouette of the 7 seas, sword disappeared without a trace. Resentment was reborn, and the rope of Sorrowful Face was swung out of Huaishur's hand amidst the blood-red light. It pierced through the dwarf's body and came out of his back. The chain blade swept out and instantly shackled the heavily injured dwarf. "Come here." Huaishur roared. Ignoring the lightning that enveloped him, he pulled with all his might. The axe of wrath appeared in his hand. He raised it and chopped down at Skullhunter's neck. The lightning that filled the sky dissipated in this chop. Only blood flew into the air. Skullhunter offered up his head. The first one. Huaishur turned around and swept out with the spear of compassion. It destroyed the sharp bone blade and pierced towards Sorrowful Face like a hot knife through butter. But in that instant, everything came to a standstill. In front of the spear, Sorrowful Face opened his mouth and let out a resounding, ear-piercing cry. It was as if the grief that had accumulated for tens of thousands of years spread out along with the roar. Everywhere it passed, everything was enveloped in a gloomy light and frozen. It was as if an insect was sealed in amber, and in the frozen time, only Sorrowful Face slowly crawled up and moved forward. He did not care about the shattered armor on his body and pulled out a sharp blade. Inch by inch, he stabbed towards Huaishur's face. Everything should have come to a standstill, but he strangely saw Huaishur's pupils move slightly and look at him. Huaishur's burning eyes were filled with mockery. It was as if he was looking at an idiot who had spun a cocoon and killed himself. It made Sorrowful Face's hair stand on end. But until the bone blade pierced through Huaishur's forehead, he did not resist at all. Even if his soul, which had undergone a qualitative change in divinity, could sense all of this, he could not resist at all. But it was also at that moment that a clear sound rang out from below the deck. Separated by the thick keel of the ship and the 6 layers of space in the darkness, in the surging tide of blood, the hunter silently raised his eyes and looked at his prey, who was completely unaware. He beamed with joy. "This time, I can see it clearly." In Forster's hand, the hunting rifle covered with scratches raised and casually aimed at somewhere in the darkness. He pulled the trigger. Click! There was a soft sound. It was the sound of the hammer of judgment falling. The ancestors gave him eyes, history gave him memories, and glory gave him a revelation. From that short moment, a miracle of fate finished brewing in the barrel of the gun. The primer was ignited, and the cursed bullet flew out. The fine light flashed in the barrel for a moment. Strangely, it disappeared into the air. Then it appeared again, crossing the long distance and the blockade of time, and came in front of Sorrowful Face. The burning red bullet spun in the frozen time and rushed forward at an incredible speed, illuminating the pair of empty eyes. The eternal numbness seemed to be dispelled and replaced by incomprehensible confusion and surprise. But when he dodged the bullet's trajectory at all costs, he looked up again and found that another bullet had strangely appeared in front of his eyes. It was even closer than before. When his third futile struggle was met with despair, a cold realization finally appeared in his mind. It was death, an inescapable death. In the frozen time, no one could hear whether he roared, cursed, or begged for mercy. Everything ended in an instant. In the amber that he had created, the death magic bullet flew past, easily opening his skull and evaporating the boiling darkness and eternal torment within, bringing an end to the sorrow and pain. In front of the bullet forged by fate, Sorrowful Face's body was torn apart like a thin sheet of paper. Along with his spirit soul, he was destroyed. The moment the whistling sound dissipated, everything returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. Sorrowful Face's body flew out in a bizarre manner, his head shattered. At the last moment, the thin lips on the shattered face finally opened, revealing broken teeth. It was as if he was smiling. This was the second one. Dead silence. In the sudden silence, Huaishur lowered her head and looked at the dominator beneath her feet. The ruler was stunned. He suddenly realized that he seemed to be the last one. "Don't worry, I'll be gentle." Huaishur smiled, pulled out the hammer of pain, and pointed it at Sorrowful Face's face. "I'll definitely give you a quick death." Just like that, a huge shadow slowly rose and shrouded the Sorrowful Face. Behind Huaishur, eternal darkness surged and swallowed the last of the holy light. There was a soft slap. Then there was no then. "So, I'm one step slower here." Forster sighed softly. Just below the deck, in the narrow corridor, the blood tide and gray waves had subsided. Countless broken nights of torment fell on the floor and walls, filling every gap. In the middle of the corridor, the chief engineer, whose body was dyed red by his own blood, half knelt on the ground and stared at his results. He loosened his 5 fingers. The shotgun that had been tightly held in his left hand fell into a pool of blood. Then his arm, which was full of cracks and exposed his white bones, gently rested on the head in his arms. Under the restraint and suppression of his right elbow, the last night of torment was still struggling with difficulty. With all his strength, he kept stabbing the broken longsword into his abdomen. Blood gushed out like a fountain. Forster's face was expressionless. He exerted force with his left hand and suddenly twisted. Crack! After a soft sound, the struggling enemy in his arms no longer made a sound. In the dead silence, only the chief engineer's heavy breathing could be heard. He leaned against the wall and struggled to get up. He raised his head and drank most of the last potion. The rest was poured on the messy wounds on his abdomen. He tore off the remains of his shirt and barely wrapped the wounds. Then he lit the last blood-stained cigarette and took a deep breath. He exhaled a tired smoke. It was as if a hearty competition had come to an end at the seaside. He finally turned his head and looked at his opponents lying on the ground behind him. He whispered goodbye. "Next time, let's surf together." No one responded. Only the viscous blood flowed, quietly following the cracks on the floor and meandering downwards. In the end, it looked like a scarlet drizzle. It fell on Gregory's hair, and under his feet, the secret ritual that had already covered the entire bottom deck. Success. The shepherd's eyes were full of expectation. He opened his arms, and on his skinny wrists, the seal from the Creator silently dissipated. The primordial curse was activated here. The ancient seal passed down from the gods was activated again at this moment. In the old man's hoarse chanting, the prayers of countless believers in the past appeared in the air and gathered into a wave, casting their last prayers to the gods who had passed away. The sun ship that was riddled with holes suddenly shook, trembled, and spasmed. The core engine frantically operated, and flesh and blood appeared. The thick armor kept shaking, rubbing against each other. Sparks flew, and scaly marks emerged from the scratches. Then the flames spread, and everything was bathed in the fire of God's miracle. In the flames, the phantom of a huge pair of wings slowly spread out, shrouding the battlefield as if covering the sky. In accordance with the will of the gods, a miracle was given to the behemoth in front of them. Activate! At this moment, under the suppression of the workshop master, the scale-covered sun ship slowly rose in the bubbles formed by countless nightmares. On both sides of the ship, the vertical pupils of a beast appeared in the huge searchlights, shooting out intense light. It illuminated the front of the fortress workshop, which was a distorted face. WDNMD, aren't you surprised? Aren't you surprised? A hoarse roar mixed with Raymond's and the Red Dragon's voices sounded from the broadcast. Accompanied by the loud sound of armor falling off, at the bow of the ship, the cracked shell opened from the middle, split, and spread to both sides. Like a hungry mouth, it slowly opened, and a large amount of pitch-black oil leaked out from the gaps of its teeth. The mouth of the abyss appeared here. Let's be clear, it's not you eating me, it's me eating you. Amidst the maniacal laughter, the activated giant ship tore through the bubbles formed by countless nightmares, withstanding the bombardment of countless intense lights, and fiercely bit at the front of the fortress, on the face. An earth-shattering sound spread. Sun's ship and the fortress bit tightly together, rolling on the battlefield, raising a large amount of dust, causing countless cracks to appear on the ground. Ah! My profit, my annual sales, my inventory loss. Ah! The bloated workshop master screamed miserably, as if he was grieving for his parents, tears rushing out. Let go! Let go! You bunch of poor bastards who don't even have any remaining value. Let go! A huge drill and chainsaw appeared on the fortress's arm, furiously smashing towards the prey that overestimated itself in front of it. Once, twice, thrice, the red-hot chainsaw tore through the outer armor, stabbing into the belly of Sun's ship, and countless broken pieces of machinery spurted out. However, the thirsty red dragon bit down on the prey in its mouth, not willing to let go, swallowing the workshop master's warehouse and origin substance reserves in large mouthfuls. At the very top of Sun's ship, on the messy deck, the silent main cannon suddenly emitted a sharp, grinding sound. Slowly, it turned its angle. It aimed at the terrified face on the fortress. The cracked deck completely split open, and a huge mechanical structure slowly rose up. Countless cables extended from the darkness, like snakes, once again connecting the damaged structure, continuously injecting new power into it, brewing a new radiance. In the shadows where the intense light couldn't illuminate, the tired old scholar tugged at the safety rope, preventing himself from being thrown out in the spinning world. Behind the mask, sweat stuck his white hair to his wrinkled cheeks, making him look so miserable. However, that pair of dark green eyes were still bright, just like the young man who had come to hell for his first internship. "Hello, bastard," Anton softly greeted, his hands connecting the last two broken cables. Sparks flew everywhere. It illuminated the smile at the corner of his mouth. Immediately after, the entire world suddenly darkened, because accompanied by the loud roar of steel, a radiance comparable to the explosion of stars gushed out from the main cannon. Chapter 1069. When the final circuit was connected, the anger that had been brewing in the furnace during the long journey and the sorrow of returning to the battlefield after 70 years suddenly began to shine with a brilliant light as the origin substance continued to move. The main engine, the secondary engine, the third engine, all of the power of the ship was channeled into the massive cannon, causing the damaged main cannon to burn red. The sound of waves surging echoed in the narrow chamber. In the end, it turned into a roar that shook the heavens and the earth. The light of fury that had taken physical form pounced at the workshop master, breaking through the layers of shields and swallowing up the face. In the next instant, it burned, melted, and penetrated deep into the fortress. It was like a flood that had broken through a dam, rapidly spreading. The warehouse, the production line, the keel, the cabin, the narrow corridor, and even the luxurious hall and office. Everything was set ablaze by the light. In the end, it shot out from the wall behind the workshop like a hot knife through butter. It was like a piercing sword that was dyed red. It shot towards the sky. The narrow beam actually broke through 3 depths, forming a fleeting flash in the dark abyss. Immediately afterwards, there was the sound of something shattering that sounded like a scream. The face that had been torn apart opened, its eyes wide, and struggled with all its might. Dozens of arms and legs continuously stomped on the Sun ship. It seemed to be cursing something in the language of hell, but the voice was too muffled and trembling. No one could hear it clearly. No matter how the other party struggled or attacked, the red dragon bit down on the fortress in front of it, not letting go. It was like a dying mad dog. Its eyes were scarlet red. When the workshop owner shouted something in the distance behind him, he found that there was no response. Only the painful call for help echoed between the depths, gradually disappearing into the scar area. In the end, he seemed to have understood something. He roared angrily. The massive fortress tore apart from the waist, abandoning its important components. The dilapidated fortress finally broke free from the sunship's gnawing. Countless nightmare bubbles appeared from the cracks and quickly covered his body, causing him to become half-transparent again and transform into origin substance. He fled for his life. His speed was so fast that he was like a ghost without mass. But even if he was a ghost without a physical body, there were shackles that he could not escape from. Why, sure. At that moment, Raymond roared. On the deck at the stern of the ship, Weisher waved his hand and threw the ruler's body into the ultimate. Then a shadow flashed and appeared behind Professor Anton. Stepping on the scorching body of the cannon, he raised his right hand and shrouded the workshop that was quickly disappearing into the distance. In the blink of an eye, the shadow of the serpent extended from the ground. In an instant, it crossed a distance of several kilometers and rose from the ground, wrapping around the nightmarish workshop out of thin air. Sorrow followed it like a shadow. Bind. Under the shattered deck, a huge winch rose up. After shaking off the giant anchor, it connected with the rope of sorrow. After a flash of welding light, countless sparks shot out from the flying winch. The workshop came to an abrupt stop. He staggered and took a step back under the shackles and pull of the sorrowful rope. It left a deep and despairing ravine on the ground. The workshop owner roared. The dilapidated fortress crawled on the ground, trying its best to grab something, but other than sand and bones, there was nothing. Just like that, under the drag of the sunship, it slid back another step. The sunship seemed to have really become the sun. In the cracks of the hull, countless blazing steam gushed out. When the huge engine nozzle slowly adjusted its angle and spat out blazing flames, a terrifying power burst out from the chain. The rock iron heart crazily devoured the remaining life around it and kept pulsing. Every time, it emitted a deafening thunder. Just like that, the huge fortress was pulled behind like a freight box, constantly rolling and bouncing. In the end, it suddenly braked and changed direction. Countless cracks appeared on the taut chain, and the nightmare workshop had already risen from the ground and flew into the sky. It drew a terrifying arc and destroyed the dark clouds. Under the drag of the chain, it smashed towards the ground. After plowing out a crack in the middle of a group of ratmen that had not died yet, it once again smashed into the ground like a meteor. Countless steel parts flew out from the crack. It was mixed with the workshop owner's wails and screams. In the stinky foam all over the ground, the nightmare workshop tried to restart. The broken chain saw kept slashing at the tight iron chains on its body. When a lone star streaked across the empty sky like a tear, the movement came to an abrupt stop. The huge and dilapidated workshop quickly faded, leaving only an outline that looked like it was drawn by ink. It lost its weight, color, and even thickness. In the end, it became as light as a piece of paper. As the thick cover closed, it appeared in Forster's hand. Record of events, Les Miserables. Now, there were no more enemies on the ground. However, on the bridge, Raymond did not even have time to catch his breath. He pushed the output gear to the limit, ignoring the wailing engine and the hull. In order to reduce the damage, he even abandoned a large amount of armor and damage parts and sped through hell at a speed that was close to self-destruction. Because in the sky, behind the shattered dark clouds, endless shadows were slowly emerging. Following the sound of the bugle horn, one after another, colossal creatures descended from the depths of the abyss. More hells, more enemies, and more monsters were pouncing on this battlefield, under the cover of countless beautiful aurora-like neon lights. They were like bugs that had temporarily obtained a breather in a spider web, unable to escape the malice that seemed to have enveloped the entire abyss. 31, 32, 34. On the bridge, the snail brought despairing news. More than 40 legions are approaching us. Is there a difference between 23 and 40? They're all dead. Raymond rolled his eyes. Can't you say something useful? Okay. Odom followed the advice and suggested, turn left a little bit ahead. We're 10 minutes away. Also, someone's firing. What the hell? Raymond was stunned for a moment and only felt darkness in front of him. On top of the overheated main cannon, Huaisher looked up and saw the huge shadow riding on the dark clouds, as well as the island that chased after them like a fish in water. It was as if it was directly pulled out from the mountains by a giant and thrown into the sky, staying eternally in the sky. The terrifying scale, that was almost like an asteroid, hung high in the darkness. Countless palaces carved out of the rock walls shone with the light of miracles. It was just like the reappearance of Olympus in hell, a majestic mountain that was recreated by the solidified alchemists in hell. With such a solidified and ferocious appearance, it was not an exaggeration to call it the Palace of Hell. Now, it had completely fallen from imprint of miracles, Olympian foundation, to the crystallization of disaster, the place of the banquet of demons, Tartarus. Let's say hello to our old friends. In the darkest place at the top of the demon palace, Hades grinned, relying on the senses of his soul. He looked down at his opponent, who was at the end of his rope. This is where you will be buried. Suddenly, a low drum sound burst out from the demon palace. Echoing the fragments drifting in the abyss, thumb-sized flames appeared in the neon sky that was full of neon lights. Under the transport of the heaven ladder, huge fragments of hell were transported to this depth one after another. After being transformed by a secret instrument, they formed countless stars that fell from the sky. The burning stars burst out with a roar, dragging a flaming tail as they fell from the darkness of the abyss. It was like a rainstorm. It swallowed the tiny sunship. The earth wailed, and the spreading flames rose with a huge mushroom cloud. Everything was buried in the terrifying temperature. In an instant, it flashed and dodged the first wave of bombardment. But then, the sunship was like a withered leaf, involuntarily flying in the aftermath of the raging waves and rolling in the wind. The secret instrument that shrouded the ship was constantly cracking. Gregory roared hoarsely. The skinny shepherd was like a nail. He stepped on the trembling secret instrument and forcibly propped up the shield with both hands. His skin quickly cracked. Before the viscous blood could flow out, it evaporated in the high temperature leaking from the engine. Now, he couldn't care less about whether it would affect the operation of the ship's technological equipment. Other than the engine and transmission system that were still running wildly, everything else had been shut down. He had to save every bit of energy to maintain the integrity of the ship. The gallop that accompanied destruction was still stubbornly continuing, like a tired wild dog galloping on the road to death. It wouldn't turn back even if it died. Then let's do it again. Hades spread out his 5 fingers and slightly rotated them. The flash of the secret instrument illuminated his malicious smile. Double, quadruple, and more. Suddenly, the scattered meteorites in the sky suddenly stagnated, and the falling direction began to deviate towards the sun ship. It locked onto the strugglers on the ground. It leaped from the night sky and descended from the sky with destruction. Accelerate, accelerate! Huaisha roared and pressed his palm on the heart of rock iron. He did not hesitate to toss the sorrowful visage, dominator, and even the gnomish skull hunter that he had stored in the ultimate towards the beating heart. The heart greedily swallowed every drop of blood. Behind the thin layer of stone, the electric light in the heart chamber surged and thunder rumbled again. At the tail of Sun's ship, dozens of nozzles trembled violently and actually split into twice the number. Flames spurted out and pushed the huge ship to accelerate once more. Around the ship, the remaining fine ripples of the Nether River had turned into monstrous waves. They were running wildly. Every second counted, but the god of death was still close at hand. Countless meteorites chased after him as if they had ignored inertia and potential energy. They would not give up until they reached their goal. "I've been locked on," Redmond screamed miserably as he clutched onto the control stick in a daze due to the massive loss of blood. As for the red dragon, it had not spoken since a few minutes ago. "Forster, give me the book." In the communication, Weischer shouted below the deck. The panting chief engineer did not care about stabilizing his body. He unbuckled the buckle on his waist, and the heavy book sealed in copper flew out of his hand toward Weischer. It landed in his hand and quickly flipped through it. The image of the elephant spirit, Chandra, appeared on the title page and helped Weischer turn the page. Then it quickly froze at the end. Weischer took a deep breath, grabbed the remaining railing on the deck, and raised the book in his hand toward the countless meteorites that were chasing behind the ship. Origin substance poured in. Between the fine handwriting, the frozen illustration came to life again. It was given color, shape, appearance, outline, and volume. It was the nightmare workshop that had just been sealed inside. At this moment, the workshop owner, who was finally free, did not have time to breathe a sigh of relief before he saw countless terrifying flames rushing toward him at that moment. He only had time to let out a final wail. "Damn it, why?" In the next moment, the workshop was engulfed by countless meteorites. Those overlapping destructive forces were completely triggered. The skeleton that could withstand the bombardment of a large-caliber main cannon, the treasury that could hold countless wealth, the products that had not yet been slimmed down, the slaves that were bound to the production line, and the cocoon production that every workshop owner would activate at the moment of death. Everything evaporated in the flames and disappeared without a trace. Only the broken remains rose into the sky after drawing a heartbreaking arc, fell on the demon palace, and nailed into the soil. It was a broken pillar. At the top, the broken wall lamp still stubbornly bloomed with the last trace of light. Under the suspension of those cables, the workshop owner's charred body swayed alone in the wind. The last drop of sorrowful tears slowly fell. There was no more sound, and right at the center of the explosion, the frantically flashing sunship was unable to avoid the sweeping aftermath. Countless parts of the ship's hull scattered, and the engine at the tail exploded. Amidst the waves, they rolled violently on the ground. After drawing out ravines, they seemed to have bumped into something invisible. There was a crisp cracking sound. Countless cracks appeared in the flickering void, like smashed glass, spreading rapidly. In the end, under the impact of the destructive aftermath, the illusion and blockade that had lasted for a long time was completely broken. After the blockade, a thick fog gushed out like a tide. It spread. It completely submerged the broken sunship. It disappeared. The violent rolling and collision lasted for an unknown amount of time. In the terrifying turbulence that felt like the sky and earth were spinning, Weischer only remembered to use the sorrowful rope to entangle everyone together, and did his best to hold the ultimate open. But under the weak operation of the divine mark, even the ultimate could no longer be maintained. In the dilapidated cabin, in the darkness, only the last electric sparks flickered. Weischer panted, propped up his body, and looked at the world outside the crack. There was only fog and a vague outline. Everything in front of him was almost unbelievable. Ecstasy. He even forgot about the enemies that were chasing after him. We're here? Probably. On the floor, the rusty snail with a cracked shell was already surviving tenaciously, even if its internal organs were squeezed out of the wound. Weisher frowned. What do you mean by probably? Probably means that I'm not sure, Odom replied helplessly. Since 70 years ago, no rust snails could survive in the surrounding area, so you need to be prepared, Sir Weisher. Maybe the monsters brought by the deep backflow are still here. Weisher was silent for a moment, looking down at it indifferently. That is to say, there may be a trap ahead, right? Maybe. Everything is up to you, Sir Weisher. Odom replied frankly, it's normal for a hell creature like me not to be trusted, and it's reasonable to be on guard. However, we have reached our destination, and you should be able to see what you are looking for soon. It paused for a moment, and its tone was complicated, although the result may not be satisfactory. At this moment, on the wasteland, the endless thick fog filled the air. Finally, it gradually dissipated. The demon palace, hanging high in the sky, paused slightly. It looked down at everything in the distance. It was as if it was unbelievable. After a long silence, Hades asked hoarsely, Mathers, what is that? That's what we used to be. The solidified being of Golden Dawn looked at the world under the fog, and his eyes gradually became compassionate and nostalgic. Perhaps this is the ignorant nature of the utopia. Hades didn't say anything. After a long time, in the silence, it was difficult to suppress the mockery and malice surging in his heart. He laughed out loud. Tears almost flowed down his cheeks. When Weisher stood on the broken deck again, the wind of the past blew from afar. The fog rolled and gradually thinned in the aftermath of the explosion. However, there was no outpost here, nor was there a former base. Between the broken bricks and tiles all over the ground, there were countless huge corpses piled up like mountains. The ground was torn apart by some terrifying force, leaving behind a bottomless valley. It extended straight forward, as if it was going to extend to the end of hell. In the center of the crack was a corpse so huge that even hell couldn't contain it. It was a giant beast that stood above the mountains. Countless crystal pillars pierced its body. They had long dimmed, and only a faint glow shone. In front of its chest was a terrifying crack. The strike that had once pierced through the ground had completely killed the terrifying creature from the bottom of the abyss. The only thing that remained was a huge corpse. Thick, blood-like fog flowed out from the crack in its chest. Even after 70 years, it still hadn't flowed out in the middle of the mountains of corpses. There was only a small forest on the only flat piece of land. The forest formed by the tombstones. Like flowers growing from the bones of the dead, they bloomed silently and spread to the end of the world. On the tombstones, the rusty nameplates swayed slightly in the wind, emitting bursts of fine sounds that would continue into eternity. The heroic souls of the past slept here, together with the monsters from the bottom of the abyss. Guarding them was a steel wreckage covered in dust. It was as if it had been burned out and completely broken from the middle. The majestic and cold appearance of the past had become so decadent, covered with traces of rust. It had long since died with its enemies. It fell silently in the abyss. 70 years, this was their destination. In this eternal silence, everyone looked up at the world in front of them, silently offering their condolences to everything that had passed away. After a long time, Weisher lowered his head tiredly and couldn't help but want to laugh. Laugh at himself. Look, Weisher, this is the end of the journey. You think you're extraordinary, and you claim to be the successor. You so proudly embarked on this expedition, and you didn't hesitate to go through untold hardships to come here. You want to rebuild the great cause of the past, and you want to receive the legacy of the heroes. But the heroes will not leave behind any legacy. When the stars were completely burned out, all that was left behind was ashes. You should have understood. In the face of disaster, how can the heroes leave? As early as 70 years ago, they never thought of turning back. No matter how strict the orders were, no matter how desperate the predicament was, they would not stop. They did not expect the arrival of the so-called savior, nor did they leave the mission to their successors. When the torrent of disaster poured back, they chose to be the enemy of the abyss. From the beginning to the end, they never took a step back. They fought alone, with everything, even if they had to sacrifice everything. Now, other than the ashes that they were so proud of, what other treasures could they give to the people who would come after them? There was nothing more. But even though there was nothing, Huaisha was not disappointed. Even if there was only dust here, he couldn't feel any anger. He felt that perhaps he had already gone crazy just like his predecessors. The shadow of death was following closely behind, but when he saw everything in front of him, he couldn't help but want to cheer for the dead. How fortunate to meet you today. After 70 years, the late successor reached out, stroked the wreckage in front of him, and greeted, "Hello, Nautilus." Chapter 1070. In 70 years of silence, there was no sound. The souls that had passed away in the past could no longer respond to the greetings from the present. Only the nameplates on the countless tombstones still sang quietly in the wind. In the silence, Huaisha raised his head and looked up at the gradually darkening sky. From the realm of reality to hell, in just half a month, they gradually went deeper into the abyss until they arrived here. The hardships that they had gone through were nothing compared to the ones that had been buried here. Now, their journey was finally over. Unfortunately, it was still too late. Can you still move? Huaisha took a deep breath, turned around, and looked behind him. Everyone, we may have to walk a little longer. We're almost out of gas. Raymond sighed and patted the keel of the sun's ship. Let's see how far we can go. It's no big deal. Forster lowered his head and bandaged his left hand. He calmly replied, I'm a senior member of the Extreme Sports Club. Even if we walk a few hundred meters, then you'll have to carry me when the time comes, Gregory said. I sprained my waist. Forget it. Pretend I didn't say anything. The chief engineer sighed, helplessly, took off the unloaded shotgun, and handed it to him. Use it as a walking stick. Okay. Gregory weighed it. It's just a little heavy. It was fine as long as it could be used. Why should he care so much? In the end, Huaisha was silent and looked at Anton at the front. Between the low tombstones, the old professor lowered his head and stared at one of them in a daze. He bent down, took off his helmet, and half knelt on the ground. It was as if he had met the deceased again. He said something silently. He lowered his head. Soon, he turned around and returned. Only 2 nameplates were left, wrapped around the tombstone, as if he had returned to his hometown. Do you want to rest for a while more? Huaisha asked. We still have some time. No need. The old man shook his head. Like you said, meeting and parting are always hurried, aren't they? I'm already satisfied to be able to see her again. Just like that, Anton turned back and took one last look. Goodbye, everyone. He whispered goodbye. Just like that, they turned around and once again stepped onto the gangway of Sun's ship. Soon, the broken warship started its engine again, turned around, and walked out of the gradually thinning fog, returning to the desolate hell. He returned to the battlefield that belonged to him. When the lava in the sky ran out, the ground was covered with cracks and ravines. This world was dyed red with blood, shrouded in the bright neon light of the stairway to heaven. The demon palace hung high, coldly looking down at the group of enemies who had nowhere to run. Hell was deathly silent. Only countless streams of light continued to descend from various depths. Huge legions from the fallen countries appeared one after another on the ground of hell. They had already spread out in formation and turned into a boundless black sea. All exits were completely sealed off. There was no way to escape. In the gloomy sky, there were countless huge monsters rapidly approaching, tracing the aura of celestial genealogy, and descending on this battlefield. However, amidst the gradually surging darkness, two peculiar lights descended from the sky. They were very fast. They passed through the formations and monsters from various hells without any obstructions and descended in front of Sun's ship. One was tall and one was short, one was fat and one was thin. They wore white and black ceremonial robes and raised their certificates in their hands. In the other hand, they showed a document with hundreds of different seals. They were the commissioners from the Hell's Music Association and the Cooking Demon Competition. In an instant, all of Hell seemed to have fallen into a temporary standstill. Only uncontrollable anger erupted, as if they had seen a troublemaker. The newcomer didn't waste this precious time and directly said to the figure at the bow of the ship, "Mr. Weisher, you have a choice." Weischer's action of sharpening his sword paused slightly and raised his head in confusion. "Please speak. Just now, the association has made a decision about your matter," the commissioner said. The commissioner of the Hell Music Association said, "More than 40 Calamity musicians have unanimously agreed that you have amazing talent and have created many results that are difficult for mortals to achieve. If you are willing to cooperate, the Hell's Music Association will provide you with protection." Beside him, the short, fat man in a black suit nodded. "The same goes for the Cooking Demon Committee." "So good." Weischer thought for a moment and asked curiously, "Then what's the price?" The two looked at each other and raised the document in their hands that was stamped with countless seals of the Hell's Music Association and the Cooking Demon Committee, showing the contents to Weischer. In the lower right corner of the document, the signature column was empty. As long as Weischer signed his name, he would be protected by the authority of the Hell's Music Association and the Cooking Demon Committee at the same time. But the price was the same. You need to receive the seal of the abyss and become a member of the inner circle. The two said, "From now on, bid farewell to the present realm and stay in hell forever." In other words, the acceptance was solidified, becoming a part of hell. With your qualifications, in time, you will definitely be able to become a new ruler. Even the position of president of the association and the committee will not be a problem. The commissioner said, "Please reconsider. This is a bit troublesome." Weischer thought for a moment and shook his head helplessly. "I'm sorry. Although my pursuit of art has not faded at all, I feel that there are more important things to do. Please allow me to refuse." The commissioner was silent for a moment, put away the document in his hand, bowed, and said goodbye. "Then, I won't disturb you any longer. Thank you for your persistent pursuit of art. We promise that your name and the results you have created will always be preserved in the association." "It would be best if that's the case." Weischer smiled and nodded. "Goodbye, goodbye." The two commissioners turned and left. Their figures flew away with the dim light. Just like that, the last life-saving straw also disappeared in the deepest part of hell. "Gone?" Kitten asked. "Yes, gone." Weischer nodded. "I'm sorry. Be rational. I should have chosen that one. Have you ever been rational? Who would expect you, celestial genealogy people, to have brains?" Kitten snorted and smoked. His tone became depressed. "Tell me, does this count as a failure of investment? After hiding for so many years, I still couldn't hide. This time, I'm really going bankrupt." Weischer shook his head. "With me here, You can still escape, cancel the contract, and go back to the paradise. Forget it. Why bother? Kitten shook his head. Since I'm already here, it's not my habit to withdraw my investment when the wind is not good. Since I want to gamble, I have to accept my loss. He was silent for a moment, as if he had made up his mind. He said seriously, "Why, sure, you have to remember your promise." "Don't think too much, Kitten. I don't need to do anything else." Weisher said without turning his head. "Our contract has already been recorded in the Sunship's black box. The moment the black box is destroyed, all the information will be sent to the present. Even if I die, there will definitely be someone who will carry it out." Kitten was stunned and seemed to smile bitterly. "That's good. In this case, even if you die, you won't have any regrets, right? In the past, I thought that dying was actually not a big deal. It was just a matter of time. Although I was very scared, there would be a day when it was inevitable. But now, I feel that it would be a pity to die. I still have a home to return to, and there are people waiting for me there. Being able to live is the best. So, don't give up so early." Weisher thought for a moment and said seriously, "Before you die, everyone should try to live as much as possible." "Then what about after you die?" Gregory asked in boredom as he cracked the last of the melon seeds. "You're already dead. What's the point of thinking so much?" Weisher laughed. He propped himself up and moved his body. Under countless malicious gazes, he slowly warmed up and stepped forward. Just like that, he looked up at the sky and waved his hand. "I'm right here," he asked curiously. "Hades, and guys from the Golden Dawn, you guys are looking at me, right? What are you guys waiting for?" In the dark sky, the demon palace stirred up waves from the dark clouds, brewing angry flashes of light. And Weisher opened his arms. He smiled and looked towards the abyss, full of expectations. "Come, come. Our war is not over yet. Our battlefield will be right here." So, behind him, the last remnants of the defeated soldiers regrouped and drew their swords towards hell. "I heard laughter?" Hades asked. "Yes." Mathers replied. "Our enemy is laughing. He's not afraid." "I know. He's never been like this." Hades nodded and remained silent. His expression twitched ferociously. It's that face that doesn't know how to repent even when death is near. That's the most annoying. At that moment, at the top of the demon palace, Hades's charred eye sockets shot out the light of anger and killing intent. Faint flames enveloped his body and even covered the entire demon palace. On the battlefield, countless bones and blood seemed to have lost gravity. They rose into the sky and gathered under the shadow of the demon palace. A huge disaster slowly took shape from the shadow. The essence of the abyss was revealed in this crazy alchemy. Terrifying power rose endlessly. In the end, on the throne, Hades' body and soul also dissolved in the flames. Immediately, he was reborn from the dark vortex of disaster. Countless hideous limbs entangled with each other as if they had turned into a pair of dragon wings. A huge creature covered in white bones struggled to crawl out of the vortex. It was as if it had been born from the womb of hell. With a huge number of deaths and sacrifices, the forbidden technique from Helios was reborn. This was the power that Hades had been preparing for a long time. The pinnacle of hell, the artificial ruler, with the countless sins of the past as a sacrifice, birth, growth, and death. Countless versions of himself were summoned from the past and thrown into the furnace, cutting off the future of fate. To achieve the eternal present, the four pillars, Asteru, the instant it was born, countless people's wails erupted from the furnace. On the earth, all life was like dust. Wherever the dim waves passed, they were like wheat before a strong gust of wind, silently falling. Their bodies and souls were completely plundered by Hades' breath. The long robe woven from white bones seemed to cover the sky and the earth. The entire battlefield was shrouded in eternal darkness, and in the sky, Hades' new eyes still had lingering shadows. The curse from Great Si Ming had taken away one of his eyes forever. Even such a degree of rebirth could not recover it. Why sure? Hades roared. In the void, skinny palms appeared out of thin air and pressed down on the ground, bringing down thunderous destruction. Outside the demon palace, Mather, who was hiding from the aftermath of the disaster, pressed down on his hat and looked at the figure on the ground. He could not help but shake his head when he recalled the young man he first met on the Stellaris. They were enemies who could not tolerate each other. This guy had even ruined his plans several times. Even Woodman almost died in his hands. But unexpectedly, Mather hated that he could not come. It was as if he was facing countless companions who had stood in his way. He sighed in pity. He is a hero after all. What a pity. He waved his hand and looked behind him. Go, Frankenstein. End the grudge between you and him. In the double helix behind Mather, the huge monster that had been silent for a long time roared and roared in anger. The mutants that had been carefully cultivated from countless abyss bloodlines raised their strange eyes. The strange body was so skinny and had the texture of a tree. Big mouths covered its body. When the dim light illuminated the strange giant, a sinister shadow was projected in the sky. It was like a huge tree that reached the sky. There were no flowers or leaves, only withered branches spread out angrily. Under the cultivation of the land of dreams, the remnant of the rotten dream was reborn with the appearance of a giant. After making up for its own flaws, it even went one step further. It had authority in its hands. The moment it descended, countless phantoms rose from the ground. Countless trees of bones broke out from the cracked ground and stretched straight up as if they were going to reach the end of the sky. All the lives it had devoured were reborn under its power and became one of the trees in the endless forest. And now, the desolate trees in all directions were rapidly closing in on Sun's ship at the center. Countless branches that grew horizontally formed a blockade that had no gaps left. There was no room for relaxation. Under the hatred, it went all out. And a minute ago, 2 depths away, in a certain hell, a group of travelers seemed to have sensed something and slowly turned around. In the shackles, the general sneered and looked at the muscular old man in front of him. You're not going to make a move. What does it have to do with me? Old Luo waved his hand coldly and did not stop walking. As a teacher, it's already benevolent to bring a student out. He chose the path himself, so he has to walk it himself. At most, I'll shed a few tears for him and take revenge for him in the future. So cold. The general chuckled and glanced at the fog dissipating in the scar area. Moreover, it's too late, because in the depths of hell, in the darker shadows, there was a furious ruler that was rapidly rising. She harbored a deep-seated hatred. It did not even care about the direction of the abyss tide. It threw the War of the Worlds aside. The moment it smelled the scent of celestial genealogy, it turned around and rushed straight to the scar area. Between the layers of depths, amidst the endless curses, was a huge eyeball covered in scars. In the center of the eyeball, it seemed to have been severely injured by something and could not be healed until now. Rotten tears mixed with dead thunder kept flowing down. The ruler who had been severely injured by the Republic roared silently. This hatred that had been brewing for 100 years had turned into reality and stirred up deep waves. It sped up. Then, the moment before it descended, it stopped abruptly. It seemed to be blocked by a huge monster. It hovered outside hell, but in front of him, Other than countless fragments of disturbance and the dust of hell, there was nothing else. If there had to be something, then there was only one, an innocent rust snail passing by. Lonely, helpless, pitiful, and like to watch fun. Such a small thing blocked in front of the ruler. "I'm sorry, can you wait a moment?" the snail said pitifully. In the short silence, an angry roar soon sounded. "Odom, a piece of trash like you still dares to appear in front of me?" The snail was shocked. "Weren't we good friends back then?" "Well, just before, when I was still the ruler." "Friends? Is there such a thing in hell?" The eyeball sneered. "Besides, I don't remember having a friend who helped the people of the present realm after being defeated by them. Why do you have to be like this? I have my own difficulties as well." Odom sighed helplessly. His short tentacles scratched his big eyes and reminded, "Don't forget, you still owe me a favor back then. Just give me face, go home, sleep, and pretend that you didn't see it, okay?" "Not good," the ruler asked coldly. "Answer me, Odom, why are you stopping me? What are you planning?" "I'm not planning anything," the snail replied innocently. "Friend, you know me. What else can I do? In order to make things more interesting, in order to have more fun. Of course, if you think that this reason is still not enough, then it can also be to protect you." "Protect me?" the ruler sneered in disbelief. "You? Yes, that's right." Odom answered seriously, "Because if you go, you might die." As if describing a truth, Odom solemnly emphasized, "Not only you, but soon everything that goes there will die." In the most tragic way, the broken eyeball was silent. It didn't know whether it should laugh or not. It didn't know what kind of joke this was, or whether it was a lie told by the damn thing in front of it to have fun. But soon, it didn't have to be confused anymore, because it was trembling. Fear. It couldn't help but tremble from its body to its soul. Its huge pupils dilated and felt an unprecedented chill. It didn't come from in front of it, but from behind. In a deeper abyss, in a darker and more chaotic place, at the bottom of hell that was eternally silent, in the ocean that was full of disasters and despair, something was slowly rising. It wanted to scream, but it couldn't make a sound. When it wanted to escape, it was already too late. It was already too late. That thing was already very close to him. It couldn't see, couldn't feel, but every part of its body, even the sticky pus that flowed out of its wounds, was screaming silently. The screams of despair could only echo in its soul. A shadow more terrifying than death shrouded it, but soon it couldn't help but tremble. It almost wanted to roar crazily because the indescribably terrifying torrent had flown past. It brushed past their existence. It didn't care, as if it was looking down at a speck of dust. The torrent of disaster swallowed everything in front of it. It left the two lucky ones behind and flew into the distance. At that moment, the sky in the scar area broke. Countless cracks suddenly appeared on the dark dome. The earth trembled, and the sky shook. Everything seemed to let out an ear-piercing scream in an instant. That was hell. Hell was wailing. Pure darkness poured in from the cracks like a waterfall and turned into a fierce tide. In an instant, it swept in all directions. And right after the countless cracks formed a gigantic fissure, a huge burning object crashed down with a loud rumble towards everything in front of it. In that instant, on the battlefield, everyone's vision went dark. Countless monsters had silently exploded the moment they saw and heard what was happening. Huaisher only felt a sharp pain in his eyes. He only saw darkness. The darkness was burning, but was that really darkness? Or was the naked eye deceiving him? His brain and soul were wailing. All his senses had deviated from himself and were beyond his control. They constantly presented him with complex and strange outlines, but he couldn't define everything in front of him in a cognitive way. He even began to wonder if that thing really had a body, or perhaps he had gone mad. Was he sinking into the illusion of despair and unable to extricate himself? But why could he not help but want to cry? What exactly is that? In the abyss, the trembling ruler roared at the snail. What the hell is that thing? That's a monster, my friend. Odom answered hoarsely, full of pity and fear. A real monster created by the celestial genealogy. No, the former utopia, by those lunatics who once destroyed us in order to save their world. At that moment, the endless darkness seemed to have found a home. It shrank from the roar, gathered into a beam, and sank into the former battlefield, into a steel wreckage riddled with holes. In the burning fire, the rusted steel gathered again from the disaster. Endless power gathered in it, forming the solemn and cold outline of the past. And on its body, countless crystals of disaster gathered, forming an upside-down utopia emblem, blooming with the light of fury. Deep-sea battleship, Nautilus. Endless hatred and anger were ignited once more. The roar from 70 years ago resounded in the abyss again. Goodbye, hero. Chapter 10:71. At the moment of realization, Huai sure heard the sound of his eyes bursting. Blood overflowed from his pupils and spread as if a scarlet net had enveloped the entire world. No, perhaps the world in front of him had really been dyed red by the angry fire and blood. The Nautilus was roaring. The endless darkness of disaster was reborn from the remnants of the steel body, igniting the flames once again and roaring towards the abyss. Hatred, along with the roar that shook the heavens and earth, hatred spread out from the surging darkness. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a violent wave, violently flattening all the barren forest in front of it, wherever it passed. All life and stones were turned into dust, leaving only strange claw-like gouges on the ground. Scarlet soil rolled over, covering the corpses. Then, on both sides of the warship, huge mouths opened. The darkness condensed into steel, and the violent killing intent formed fire. Like burning stars rising from hell, they instantly covered the sky, illuminating all the pale faces. Blood and fire exploded, and all the shadows in its path were evaporated. Asteru's white bone clothes were torn, and the flames spread. The surviving evil roared in anger, and the huge tree giant cast a shadow, and endless strange branches stabbed towards the Nautilus. But the Nautilus didn't dodge, allowing the ruler to pierce through it, tear it apart, and be riddled with holes. But in the darkness, in front of the Nautilus's hull, a terrifying light suddenly lit up. The crystal-like light spewed out from the darkness, raging like a torrent. Just the terrifying heat seeping out from the cracks in the hull burned all the branches that dared to touch its body to ashes. And wherever the light passed, matter, origin substance, miracles, disasters, enemies, and even the earth, everything evaporated cleanly, dissipating from the violent malice without a trace. Only the screams of the surviving evil could be heard. A rusty spear that was hundreds of meters long had pierced through the charred body. It tore through the indestructible shell, destroying all flesh and tissues. Like a whaler's harpoon, it poured into the body of the prey. Blood and fire spewed out. The tree giant, Frankenstein, roared and tried to prop up his body, but the huge shadow had already shrouded him. The broken Nautilus looked down and passed by in an instant. A crisp sound that made one's scalp go numb burst forth. Immediately after, a low chewing sound echoed in everyone's ears. Even Frankenstein's screams became inaudible. The only sound that could be heard was the sound of the dark battleship chewing on the enemy's body parts. Blood overflows from the mouth, staining the rusty teeth red. The giant tree was split in half from the middle, Blood swept out like a sea. Then, the lower half was torn into powder. He swallowed them all. The broken battleship quickly recovered and became ferocious again. The Nautilus roared and spat out flames in the air. It easily cut Asteru's huge body apart. The demon palace wailed as it fell and collapsed. Hollow eyes emerged from the darkness, spilling countless malicious curses. The ferocious attack continued. All living creatures were pushed to destruction in an orderly manner. Precise and cruel, all enemies were strangled. No snakes, insects, rats, or ants were left behind. That was no longer a struggle. It was ravaging and torture. With endless hatred, it wanted to vent all the anger that filled the depths of its soul. It was no longer rational. It was like a deranged beast. That was the monster known as the hero, made up of countless sacrifices. Teacher, Mr. Lee, and the ice room, Dunia, are you there? Anton propped himself up and looked up at the deranged appearance of his former compatriots. Turbid blood tears flowed down from his broken face. He called out hoarsely and tried his best. Answer me? No matter how much he called out their names, no one would respond. They didn't even turn around to look. There was only the angry roar of the giant beast. The stars that had once shone were no longer there. Only the monsters born in the deepest part of hell remained in front of them. The monsters were hunting, ravaging, and eating. The monsters were destroying everything. Right in front of them, everything had long been changed beyond recognition. Why did it become like this? Just seeing that appearance, the old man, who had never been weak in the face of countless hardships along the way, was already in tears. Of course it's for us, Professor. Sure gritted his teeth, endured the tearing and burning pain in his eyes, and stared at the ferocious figure. What else could it be for? For everything in this world, this was their final sacrifice. When the disaster of deep backflow happened, the Survival Academy calculated that even if they bet everything in hell, the success rate was still less than 5%. Therefore, there was a plan for a great retreat. Therefore, there was a miracle exchanged for countless sacrifices. It was precisely because of that heroic and glorious light that people subconsciously ignored the painful struggles hidden in the darkness. How could a success rate of less than 5% become 100%? Weapons, equipment, secret instruments, strength, and even all the reserves. When even gambling with one's life was not enough to overturn the disparity on the scale, the only remaining counterweight was the soul. When you stared into the abyss was also staring at you. When you fought with a monster, you would also become a monster. But if it was the other way around, if the abyss was staring at me, then I would also stare at the abyss. As long as I became a monster, I could continue to fight with the monster. If miracles had to be exchanged for disasters, then I would become the disaster itself. This was the decision that everyone made in the end. They gave up the eternal sleep that they should have and embraced the price that was crueler than death. Everyone froze. Those souls that were burned out did not leave behind ashes because they had thrown everything they had into the abyss. When those souls full of pain and hatred rose from the long depths, they turned into a torrent that had never been there before. When the disasters gathered into one from this wide scar, they formed an unprecedented monster. Then they devoured all the enemies. Now, the battle from 70 years ago was still going on. They pushed everything to destruction until everything was reduced to nothingness. Countless legions were burned to death in the blood and fire of hatred. The endless barren forest was annihilated, and the missiles turned into nothingness. The ruler formed by the surviving evil, and the bloodline of the abyss was torn apart by the claws and teeth. Blood and bones were chewed into scraps. The Nautilus roared and hissed. In the darkness, countless eyes looked at the huge figure of Asteru. Then, like a giant whale hunting its prey, it faced the bombardment of countless mystic instruments and miraculous engravings and went against the flow. The body that was riddled with holes brazenly crashed into the ruler formed by white bones. The sharp horns were covered in fresh blood as they easily tore apart the gigantic body of the beast. Then they pulled it and smashed it on the ground. They ravaged, crushed, bombarded, and bit it until it completely fell apart. The hell that was dyed red by blood and wreckage was ignited by flames. In the surging darkness, the eyes of hatred and madness looked at the end of the clouds. Mathers was silent. He closed his eyes and did not say anything until the darkness hit him. In the end, he sighed and took out a pistol from his arms. He aimed it at his chin and pulled the trigger. The fire flashed and disappeared. The broken body fell from the sky and was instantly devoured by the angry beast. But the soul in it had already disappeared without a trace. It had escaped. The Nautilus roared crazily. It looked back at the rainbow light that filled the sky and released endless darkness again. It violently tore all the rainbow light apart, dragged the path of the stairway to heaven, and bit it into pieces between its sharp teeth. The stairway to heaven collapsed. The last remnants were completely washed away. Only the burning ground and endless blood and corpses were left. As for the Nautilus, the body formed by the huge darkness kept crashing into the ground, whipping the remaining skeletons. It bombarded and destroyed, causing hell to constantly let out the wails of collapse. It wanted to grind all enemies into ashes. It destroyed everything in front of it in vain. It was still roaring angrily. It was as if countless people were shouting hoarsely and roaring crazily. Enemy! 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 The roar that tore all eardrums and shook all souls echoed in hell. The monster roared unwillingly and called out, "Frowny face, where is the enemy?" The crazy Nautilus kept bombarding the corpses in front of it over and over again. Must be killed. Must be killed. Must be killed. The crazy roar echoed in the dead silence of hell until a hoarse voice sounded. Enough! In front of the Nautilus, a staggering figure appeared in the burning blood and fire. It moved forward, ignoring the flames of hatred that ignited itself. There are no more enemies. Huaishur panted and shouted into the painful darkness, "Your war is over." There was a moment of dead silence. In the darkness, countless scarlet eyes appeared as if they were enraged and trembled violently. The torrent blew out, causing the earth to wail and almost blowing Huaishur away. Mission is never over. The monsters in the darkness roared angrily, and the frozen souls shouted crazily. Hell is still here. The abyss is still here. Must protect, protect, protect. No matter how much they repeated and shouted, they could no longer say anything else. They did not hesitate to become what they were today to protect the most precious thing. What did they have to protect? It had been too long. War, mission, and sacrifice were all too far away. The monsters could no longer remember why they died. The moment it understood this, the Nautilus let out a roar as it trembled and fell into madness. It kept crashing into the ground as if it wanted to completely destroy everything in front of it, including itself, until finally it could no longer find any targets. It fell to the ground and spasmed in pain. Only a sorrowful wail was left. It was the frozen souls crying in despair. Go home. In the darkness, gray tears flowed from the empty eyes. Looking at the faint light from the present realm in the sky, it was the distant hometown. It was like a whale stranded in the desert. Where is home? I want to go home. The monsters that were bound under the depth wailed hoarsely, recalling the flowers, the smiling faces, and everything that they had protected. What year and month? When will you return home? Go home. Then let's go, friends. Huaisha reached out and touched the tearful eye. He allowed his arm to decay in the corrosion of disaster. He told it, let's go home. It wasn't a hypocritical lie, nor was it a white lie. At that moment, Huaisha finally understood the meaning of his coming to hell. If all of this was fate, a brilliant flash illuminated the eyes in the darkness. In the burning of blood, a solemn book appeared in Huaisha's hand. At that moment, not only the Nautilus in front of him, but everyone on the sun ship stared at the absolute brilliance and fell into a daze and shock. That is the soul of Utopia, the source of all records, the blueprint and foundation of all future records, the core left behind by heaven, the eternal source book of celestial genealogy. The Book of Destiny. Gregory widened his eyes and groaned. He subconsciously clenched the coin in his hand and cursed, Russell, you F***king bastard. What did you do? That bastard actually sent the holder of the Book of Destiny, the true future of Utopia, the salvation of celestial genealogy, to hell. However, he didn't have the energy to think anymore. The moment the light lit up, he instinctively knelt on one knee and bowed to the solemn brilliance. Whether it was Anton, Raymond, or Forster, even the solidified darkness itself. The world was silent, and only a hoarse voice echoed. I promise you in the name of heaven. Huaisha raised his head and announced to the solidified souls, your mission and war are over. Your sacrifice is not meaningless. Your achievements are unparalleled. Next, no matter what happens, no matter what enemies stand in my way, I will bring you back home. At that moment, the Book of Destiny moved without wind. A new oath and chapter were quickly written on it. Immediately after, names appeared like a waterfall. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, everything that had been sacrificed in hell, everything that had been buried in the cemetery. All the names were recorded in it. Radiance rose, illuminating the painful eyes, washing away the madness and despair, and returning them to clarity. The darkness was boiling. Amidst the high-pitched cries, the endless calamity in the Nautilus's frame soared into the sky like a waterfall, radiating in all directions. Like the blood of monsters, it flowed to the bottom of the abyss. In the violently dissipating darkness, countless tiny specks of light fell like rain, sprinkling on the countless solidified souls. Go home, go home. The last sorrowful cry echoed in the miraculous rain. It was the lingering sound left behind by the deceased souls, like the cry of a baby when it was born. The monsters were gradually dying from the tears of relief. The phantoms of the past finally turned their heads and cast a smile of blessings at their successors before disappearing into the brilliance. Teacher, tears flowed down in Dong's face as he felt the spirit of nothingness patting his shoulder. The sheriff rode his horse and galloped past Foster. He whistled and put his hat on Foster's head. Forster froze in place, and after a long time, he slowly lowered his head. Gregory stared at them enviously, as if waiting for something. After a long time, he shook his head, sighed, and looked away. Old people can't look at this. There was a crisp laughter behind him, like a child playing a prank. Gregory looked back in shock, but he saw nothing. The laughter went away. It was unreachable. The old alchemist stretched out his hand, and after a long time, he smiled in relief. After a long time, the blood fire was extinguished, the calamity dissipated, hatred and anger disappeared without a trace, and everything was silent. Only Huaisha knelt on the ground, gasping for breath, opened his mouth, and roared silently. In the darkness, the vortex of calamity visible to the naked eye shrouded him, turning into a real distortion, radiating in all directions, constantly eroding his soul. Hey, Huaisha, don't force yourself. You Gregory rushed forward on all fours, covering him with layers of arcane devices, trying to protect his soul from being eroded. But everything was just a drop in the bucket. He should persuade Huaishur to give up, but he could not say that. "I'm fine." Huaishur looked up, the greenish-gray capillaries on his face protruding like the curse of calamity. He smiled with difficulty. "It's nothing. I've eaten the element of destruction, and I'm still afraid of this little. Even if most of the erosion had dissipated with the risk of the heroes committing suicide, the calamity contained in the solidified soul had not weakened. The Book of Destiny could strip their consciousness and soul, allowing them to return to peace. But this solidification must be borne by someone. Now, there was at least a ruler's distortion entrusted to him, and the symptoms of solidification had completely frozen Great Sea Ming's stigmata and soul, even causing the crows to undergo a further transformation. The darkness in the ultimate skyrocketed. It was like a heavy burden pressing down on Huaishur's consciousness. "It's fine. It's just a scapegoat. I'm used to this kind of thing." Huaishur collapsed on the ground, his smile twitching. He gritted his teeth and pierced the nails into his body one after another, sealing the door of the ultimate. The compatibility beyond the limit was exerted on his soul. Now, if he lost control, there was no doubt that he would transform into some kind of monster like the ruler, right? For a long time, the little bit of correction value he had accumulated could only be used as the last straw to maintain his sanity. Other than that, he probably could not do anything else. "It's all worth it, isn't it?" He looked up, looking at the final gift of the heroes, and smiled, just where the darkness disappeared. A broken warship revealed its outline, the frame was restored, and in the core there was a magnificent flash surging. It was like a gathering of all the beautiful wishes in the world. It washed away the pain and despair of the past, and returned to its crystal-like clarity. In the distant waves, it shone with a solemn and sacred light, waiting for the order to set off again. That was the heart of the Nautilus, Deep Him Nemo engine. In the long silence, everyone quietly stared at its appearance for a long, long time. "It's so beautiful." Anton sighed softly. "Who says it isn't?" Huaishur smiled, trying hard to raise his head, looking at the sky, at the eternally shining brilliance of the reality. Their journey had finally come to an end. There was only the road ahead to return home. This time, everyone had to go together. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.